This episode contains graphic audio and references to family violence. Please listen with care.
I can't believe this is happening, Dad.
Well, honey, we don't know what's happening, okay?
In the early evening hours of July 14th, 2017, Steve Hargan is trying to comfort his oldest daughter, Megan.
This is not real. I am just praying to God. This is a sick joke. Like the sickest joke ever.
They've received terrifying news. Gunshots have been fired at the house Megan shares with her mother, Pamela Hargan, in McLean, Virginia. No one yet knows what has happened inside.
I just need to see them, Dad.
Please, first of all...
And now, to make matters worse, no one can reach her mom or Megan's youngest sister, Helen.
I just want to hear their voices.
I know.
Steve and Pamela Hargan divorced years ago. Everyone is meeting up at his house while they wait for news. Ashley, the middle sister, is racing there from her home in Pennsylvania.
Ashley and I have been calling my mom and the house and Helen.
Okay.
No one's answering.
The tape you're hearing was recorded by Detective John Vickery, who arrived at Steve Hargan's house.
I'm going to record this because there's a lot going on.
The detective is staying with the family and updating them.
I'm going to get information from you, and as things start coming in, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more.
Megan explains that she had moved in with her mother a few years back with her 8-year-old daughter, Molly. Pamela was helping raise her granddaughter.
They go to the nail salon together. She does all the gardening with my mom. They're best friends.
Megan's youngest sister, Helen, who is 24, had just moved back in too. She recently graduated from Southern Methodist University with degrees in math and management science. Here's Megan again.
She was actually in the regular master's program in Dallas before she moved.
Okay.
And then she quit it.
Detective Vickery asked to speak to Steve alone.
I wanted to get a little bit more information from your dad, if I could do that in private.
Okay.
Detective Vickery whispers to Steve, hoping that his daughters don't hear him. He says,
I don't have good news.
I don't have good news, the detective says, and keeps speaking under his breath, trying to convince Steve that he's probably the strongest one to tell the rest of the family what happened.
About my daughter.
They're both deceased.
They were both found shot to death.
I'm really sorry.
Steve absorbs the information.
Thank you for letting me be the one to tell my daughters.
He waits until both his daughters are together before he shares the devastating news. 20 minutes later, Ashley arrives, and she's distraught.
This has
there,
been the longest ride of my life.
I understand.
I just want to hear my mom and my sister's voice. I want to see them. I want to make sure they're okay.
Steve decides this is the moment to tell them what he knows.
I'm sorry to tell you, girls.
Oh my God.
Your mom and Helen are gone.
Happening.
Then Detective Vickery finds his voice and shares some of the gruesome details.
Someone matching the description of your mother was found deceased on the main level. She did have a gunshot. And when officers went upstairs, they located your sister in the bathroom. The rifle was still in the bathroom.
He's saying the rifle was in the bathroom with Helen. What could that mean?
Oh God, what are we going to do? Jesus, what are we going to do? I don't know. I need to see
stop.
them.
Relax.
I really need to see them.
They took him to the medical examiner. There's an investigation going on, honey.
Who would want to kill their mother and their little sister? Before this tragedy, the Hargan women seemed to have it all.
From the outside looking in, we were blessed. My mom was amazing.
They were close and had everything to look forward to. But as detectives would soon learn, there was a lot going on inside the Hargan household. In my 25 years reporting stories like this, the Hargan case is one of the few that sounds like something made up by a Hollywood screenwriter. A story of betrayal you would struggle to believe if it wasn't true. I'm Peter Van Sant. From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings.
My sister was not my sister for many months.
Episode 1, Home from Texas.
There were several aspects of this case that were extremely unique that I have not seen before.
Earlier in the afternoon, Detective Brian Byerson gets a call to head to Pamela Hargan's house.
There were 2 bodies in a house in McLean, and I was to respond to Dean Drive.
Now, on your way there, what have you been told about what's inside that house?
Very little. We know that when we get up there that patrol has been in the house, that they had to force entry through the front door, so the house was locked, and that inside the house there were the bodies of 2 women.
He drives to Pamela Hargan's neighborhood, unsure of what he's about to encounter.
Where this took place was an affluent section of McLean, Virginia.
It's the kind of place where political power players have large homes and a yard, without too long of a commute to D.C. Presidents, senators, CIA agents have all called McLean home. The Hargans live on a tree-lined street. Their home is a nearly 5,000 square foot colonial with a covered porch and 6 bedrooms.
It's a $1 million home.
Detective Byerson and Julia Elliott, a crime scene detective and forensics expert, arrive at the house.
It certainly didn't look like some place where 2 homicides potentially had occurred.
They enter through the front door into a foyer. There's a wooden staircase with carpeted steps up to the 2nd floor, and a hallway with panel molding and black photo frames lining the cream-colored wall. It seems idyllic.
It was immaculate. I've never seen a more organized home in my life.
As detectives, they're trained to notice the details. Every chair is perfectly spaced along their long dining room table. Each throw pillow has its own place on the couch. Nothing looks amiss until they get to the back half of the house. Here's Detective Byerson again.
As you walk through the kitchen, you encounter a mudroom that connects the kitchen to the garage. So in that mudroom, we discover Pamela Hanson Hargan. She is laying on the floor of the mudroom.
Pamela Hargan has been shot twice in the head. The top half of her body is wrapped in a quilt with her legs sticking out, and her head is covered.
And she has a dog bed laying on her head, covering her.
A dog bed on her head, what do you mean?
Like a small dog bed that you would see in your house that maybe your dog would lay in, was actually covering a portion of her head.
Detectives then make their way upstairs.
If you come up that staircase into the long hallway and make your 2nd left, that would be into Helen's bedroom. And once you get into Helen's bedroom is her bathroom, and that's where her body was found.
She's leaning back, and her head is laid back into the bathtub. So she's sort of laying on both the toilet seat and the bathtub. And then her legs are pointed straight out towards the door as you walk in.
This is Helen, her 24-year-old daughter.
Yes. There was a rifle that was sort of laying between her legs.
Patrol, when they arrived, finding 2 deceased persons, one with a gun on their body, assumed or thought that there might have been a murder-suicide.
Detectives, though, aren't so sure.
I mean, a lot of these cases are like huge jigsaw puzzles that you can never fully put together.
What did you learn about the dynamic within this family? Were they a close group? I know that Megan and Helen, for instance, were about 10 years apart in age.
It seemed like they were all relatively close.
Pamela had worked hard to establish herself in a community of overachievers.
She'd been divorced for several years. She was very successful on her own.
She got her start at 17 and worked her way up to the executive suite, holding big jobs at companies like Lockheed Martin and more recently, a tech firm. Pamela saw herself as a provider.
She loved her daughters. She had a granddaughter that she absolutely adored.
People thought Helen, the youngest, took after her mom. She was smart, talented, and ambitious.
What's your gut telling you as you take a look at these two bodies?
Wait and do the job.
The clues investigators found they'd mull over for years.
We have two bodies, two different rooms, but it's one house.
Some puzzles are hard to solve. Others are hard to prove. Detective Elliott has worked in the crime scene department for about a decade.
I'm looking for anything that may have been left behind by the person that did the crime.
Such as?
Blood, fingerprints, trace DNA like hairs or fibers.
Detective Elliott notices how Pamela's body was positioned.
I believe where she was shot physically on her body and how she was laying in the mudroom, I believe someone came up either to her side or from the back and shot her.
Then there's the odd fact that her face is partially covered.
Generally, that's done in cases that I've worked because someone known to the victim may be the suspect in these cases, and they're either ashamed or they can't look at what they've done, so they choose to cover the bodies.
So sometimes it's someone very close to the deceased has done this.
That can be a clue to maybe where we should be going or what we should be looking at.
And then there was Pamela's cell phone.
That phone was sitting on top of the quilt that was covering her, and it was also sitting on top of a pool of blood.
That seems very strange, doesn't it?
It is strange. We know that it means that phone was placed there sometime after she died.
Well, I want to know what fingerprints are on that cell phone, if anything at all, and I want to find out who put that cell phone there in that particular place.
So you want to check for fingerprints and DNA?
Yes.
What do you find on this phone?
Nothing.
Nothing. Detective Elliott isn't sure if that meant the phone had been wiped clean.
Not everything holds fingerprints very well.
But Pamela couldn't have put her own cell phone on top of her body. It seemed to suggest the killer had placed the phone on her. But could it have been Helen? Megan would later tell police their little sister had been in crisis.
I love Helen, but something has really changed in her over the last few months, and my mom was concerned.
As the family would later tell detectives, Pamela seemed willing to spend on whatever her daughters needed: cars, houses, and even office furniture.
Ashley just called her last week and said she needed file cabinets. And my mom ordered file cabinets.
Here, Megan was on the phone with Detective Byerson.
They're supposed to be delivered this week. I mean, anything we needed, she gave it to us.
The girls were little when their parents divorced, and Pamela had raised her daughters on her own.
We always made the joke that that's why they got divorced, because my dad couldn't handle, 4 women at the same time.
And even when Pamela's children became adults, they still relied on her. Megan, for one, was 34 and had been living with her mother for years, even though she was married. Her husband served in the military.
My husband deploys often, so I've always stayed with my mom.
At the time of the shootings, Megan wasn't working.
Where are you working now?
I'm not right now.
You're not
I have
working?
to, I'm an event planner.
Okay.
But I have to finish my clients up here, and I'm moving everything out to Morgantown.
Okay.
Megan told the police that she and her husband were buying a new house in West Virginia and were about to finally move in together. While there was love in the Hargan household, the daughters also said there was arguing. They'd air their grievances and move on.
It's family, that's how it is.
Ashley agreed. She told Detective Byerson as much.
My mom and dad had a horrible divorce.
Okay.
Coming from a family of females, we fought a lot.
Okay.
Argued a lot. Okay? It's just how it was. What may seem really bad to other people was normal to us. Like, we would have our screaming matches, 5 minutes later we were fine.
But according to Megan, her little sister Helen had been furious lately. Then Megan revealed that the morning of the shootings, Helen and their mom had been arguing yet again.
Helen has been so angry. Like, just so angry all the time over everything.
It's unclear when Ashley and Megan put two and two together, but at some point, they started contemplating the macabre possibility that Helen might have killed their mother and then herself. Detective Vickery told their dad her wound appeared self-inflicted, but all Megan and Ashley had been told was that the rifle was found in the bathroom with Helen. They tried putting pieces of this part of the puzzle together, why Helen might have done something like this. You can hear Megan's daughter playing in the other room.
What the fuck is Helen thinking? I'm so angry right now. I just told her about the house this morning. She told her. Told her what? She was breaking the contract with the Aldi house.
According to Megan, their mother had been planning to buy Helen a house in Aldi, a small town in Virginia. But then, the morning of the shootings, Pamela told Helen she decided against it. Megan suggested that it might have had something to do with Helen's new boyfriend, an older man she'd been dating in Texas, someone her mother did not approve of. His name was Carlos Gutierrez. Helen had unexpectedly dropped out of graduate school, and Pamela thought her boyfriend was a bad influence. Megan said her mother didn't want Helen's boyfriend to move into any house she was going to buy. Pamela seemed willing to go above and beyond for her girls. But that morning, she had apparently gone back on her promise to one of them.
Because she truly believed that Helen was going to try to move Carlos into the house, and my mom didn't want him being there.
And now both sisters seem to be suggesting that maybe Helen, frustrated by her mother, somehow broke, turning to violence to settle a score and end her own life.
She was so excited about this house that my mom was getting for her.
So your mom was buying her a house?
Mm-hmm.
In the days after the shootings, Ashley spoke with Detective Brian Byerson. He'd been assigned the lead on this case, and you'll recall he'd searched her mother's house.
Why was your mom buying her house?
That's what my mom did.
Had she done it for everybody?
Not for me. My mom offered to buy my house.
Okay.
And my husband and I said no.
Ashley said her mom did buy her a Jeep, but that she didn't want to live in a house that was owned by her mother.
My husband and I talked about it, and I said, I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. I want to try to, even though we live paycheck to paycheck, I want to try to do this on our own.
But Helen had accepted her mother's offer of help. Ashley thought the offer for Helen's house in Virginia came with strings attached.
But you need to get a job, you need to continue to get your master's degree, yada, yada, yada.
Ashley also said the family was worried about Helen's well-being, that maybe she was using drugs.
She says she's concerned about Helen maybe using some other type of narcotic
mm-hmm.
or whatever. Mm-hmm. How did that conversation end?
With my mom and I?
Yeah.
She said that she wanted to take all of us to the Outer Banks for 2 weeks, mm-hmm. and she wanted all of us to be together.
She told him that Helen had a history of depression and thoughts of self-harm.
When was the last time that Helen had ever talked about hurting herself?
With me, it was probably last year, I want to say.
Ashley described a call she got from her sister while Helen was still attending university in Dallas, about a year before the shooting.
Helen gave me a call, and she was clearly drunk. Mm-hmm. And she said, I just don't want to do it anymore. And I said, what do you mean? Knowing full well immediately what she meant by that. And she's like, Ashley, I'm just sick of it all. And I said, Helen, I'm right here. There's no reason for you to say that. I'm like, I will fly out to Dallas right now if you need me to.
The detective asked if Helen gave her any reasons.
She was just sad. She's like, I have no friends. She was just sick of everything and nothing going right. Again, when you have depression, no matter what you have in life, especially, cars and how it doesn't mean shit to you.
Right.
You're just sad. I said, you have all your dogs to look after. They love you. I said, I love you.
Ashley said she kept calling to check in on Helen every 10 minutes until her sister sobered up.
I was the only one who was able to calm her down, and that's why it's killing me she did not call me on Friday. I would have been able to calm her down.
Ashley was racing through all the what-ifs, all the things that might have happened differently that day if she'd been able to speak to Helen, to calm her down, to stop her before she did anything rash. Detective Byerson asked if Helen had ever attempted suicide.
I think when she was a teenager, she tried to take pills.
Was it reported?
I don't think so, no.
How do you know about that?
She had mentioned something like that because I have been talking about it because I tried to commit suicide by taking a bottle of pills when I was about 15.
Both Helen and Ashley had thoughts of ending their lives when they were teenagers. But Ashley was now 32 and beside herself.
Every single emotion right now. Hearing about this. Finding out about this from Helen's piece of shit boyfriend.
It turns out Carlos had been the one to call Ashley and tell her shots had been fired at her mother's house. Again and again, the sisters blamed Helen's spiral on the boyfriend they'd never met. The family seemed to accept that Helen's depression could have pushed her over the edge. The day of the shooting, local reporters set up to go live not far from the caution tape.
News in Fairfax County. Police broke down the door of a home there and found 2 women dead. This happened on Dean Drive. That is not too far from McLean High School.
Reporters asked the police if they thought a killer could still be on the loose.
We asked police a short time ago, is there a danger to this community? Is there a suspect that is still at large out there? The answer to that question, a resounding no. The working theory here is a murder followed by a suicide in Fairfax tonight.
The Fairfax County Police told the family and the community that initially this looked like a murder-suicide.
We're learning more tonight about the mom and daughter found dead inside a McLean, Virginia home on Friday. Police say Helen Hargan shot her mom, Pamela Hargan, before turning the gun on herself.
But those were first responding officers at the scene, not Detective Byerson.
It's unfortunate. It certainly didn't come from the investigators who were actually doing the work on the ground.
Right from the start, they had a major clue that something very different had happened to Pamela and Helen Hargan. That's because Helen's boyfriend, Carlos, who was more than 1,000 miles away, had been talking to her on the phone right before she died. It turned out not everything the police had been told about Carlos was true. He had been trying to get his girlfriend help for hours, trying to save her, in fact.
Fairfax County Police and Fire, how may I assist you? Yes, I have an emergency. My girlfriend lives in McLean. Her sister is acting really weird.
Coming up on Blood is Thicker.
This particular case, there were things about the scene itself that were concerning to us on day one.
If you are in crisis and need to talk to someone, call the suicide hotline at 1-800-273-8255. Or you can simply dial 3 digits, 988, to talk to a trained counselor. From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Judy Tygard is the executive producer of 48 Hours. Original reporting by 48 Hours producers Sarah Ely, Michelle Sagona, Lauren White, and Josh Yeager. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio, and Maura Walls is the senior story editor. Recording assistance from Alan Pang and Marlon Policarp. Special thanks to Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus and 48 Hours senior producer Peter Schweitzer. Blood is Thicker is produced by Sony Music Entertainment. It was written and produced by Alex Schumann. Our executive producers are Catherine St. Louis and Jonathan Hirsch. Our associate producer is Zoe Culkin. Theme and original music composed by Hansdale Shi. He also sound designed and mixed the episodes. We also use music by Blue Dot Sessions. Catherine Newhan is our fact-checker. Our production managers are Tamika Balance-Kolasny and Samantha Allison. I'm Peter Van Sant. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to rate and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. You can listen to Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. This episode contains graphic audio and references to family violence. Please listen with care.
Fairfax County Police and Fire, how may I assist you? Yes, I have an emergency.
More than 1,000 miles from where he believes a crime is unfolding, Carlos Gutierrez is desperately trying to save his girlfriend's life. This was back in the summer of 2017.
Hello? Are you there? Yes, I'm here.
These calls are from emergency services in Northern Virginia. That's where the love of his life, Helen Hargan, lives.
I'm thinking my girlfriend's life is in danger.
His girlfriend's life is in danger, but Carlos feels like the 911 operator isn't taking him seriously. Why aren't they responding with concern?
Okay, sir, what I need you to do then is contact your local jurisdiction, file a report with them, and tell them that Fairfax County requires a teletype in order to do a welfare check.
Okay, I think this is like life or death. Like, I think someone might be dead.
Carlos is trying to make sure the operator understands the seriousness of the situation. But instead of quickly dispatching police, the 911 operator tells him to call someone else.
Contact your local jurisdiction, file the report, have them send us a teletype, and then we will go and check on her.
Okay, how do I get a hold of my jurisdiction? How do I do that?
Well, sir, if you don't have their non-emergency number, if you dial 911, you'll get your emergency center.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
I would play this 911 call for Detective Brian Byerson of the Fairfax County Police. He told me this first operator no longer works at the call center.
Yeah, this one is incontrovertibly horrible. We do not require a teletype number to report a possible homicide.
Yeah.
That's completely ridiculous.
Carlos would call, speak to an operator, and then be told he needed to call someone else again and again. Listen closely, because this 911 tape is not exactly easy to understand.
Is your girlfriend at home right now? Well, that's the thing. She won't answer her phone.
According to Carlos, hours earlier, Helen had called him to say her mom might be dead. And then she stopped answering her phone. She hadn't called 911. Carlos didn't hear from her, and now he was worried Helen was in danger. In a race against time, Carlos keeps calling the police.
We're going to need you to call your local police department. And
they're still not there?
I'm sorry?
They're still not there?
How are we supposed to get there? Well, you didn't give us an address.
Y'all can't look up the name, Pam Hargan and McLean, and...
We looked up the names, Pam Hargan and McLean. We don't list individuals by name. We don't record information that way.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time. I'm sorry.
Finally, more than an hour after his first 911 call, police tell Carlos that they're sending officers to Helen's home. Detective Brian Byerson didn't find out about Carlos's calls to 911 until after he walked through the Hargan house and saw the two bodies for himself. Ultimately, what Carlos had to say would blow a hole in the theory that this was a murder-suicide, and that meant a killer could still be on the loose.
If true, you have a brutal, vicious killer in this community who could kill again.
That is correct.
I'm Peter Van Sant. From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Episode 2, The Boyfriend. Carlos Gutierrez is on the phone with a 911 supervisor out of Fairfax County, Virginia.
Okay, Mr. Gutierrez?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so
She asks him more about his relationship with Helen Hargan.
how long have you known your girlfriend?
For about a year.
Carlos and Helen had been dating for a year. They first met in Dallas.
They were working at a local restaurant together, and there were sparks. They hit it off.
This is Michelle Sigona. She's a producer for 48 Hours and has spent years following the case.
There are cases we will spend months, years on, and then they will air. This is one of those that we spent an incredible amount of time prior to it airing.
Carlos was in his early 30s when he met Helen. She was 23.
He said that, although maybe he wasn't technically formally living with her per se in Texas, he was at her house 24/7. So they were living together essentially.
Helen was attending Southern Methodist University and said on her resume that her goal was to work for a defense contractor, just as her mom Pamela had once done. According to Carlos, they fell in love and were inseparable.
It seemed like Carlos was planning to include Helen in his long-term future.
The couple were planning to leave Dallas and build a new life together in Northern Virginia.
He was so dedicated to Helen that Carlos was ready to leave his life in Texas and move to Virginia.
As Carlos calls 911 the day of the tragedy, he tells the story of the life they had planned.
We got a house that's getting built.
He even mentions the house in Aldie, Virginia, that Helen's mother was buying. He said they were serious, committed.
According to Carlos, he had big plans for their future. He was planning to propose to her at some point.
After Helen made the move back east, the couple video chatted, texted, and called every day. He said the night before the shootings, they missed each other so much that they spent nearly 4 hours talking on the phone.
That's a long time to talk to anyone.
10 days before Pamela and Helen's deaths, Carlos went to see Helen in Virginia.
So according to court testimony, Carlos said he came to the area. He did not stay at Pam's house, that he and Helen stayed at a hotel nearby.
Carlos said he had no idea that Helen's family had any animosity toward him until after the shootings. But there were signs. None of Helen's family came out to meet him when he and Helen stopped by the house for blankets for a 4th of July outing.
The blankets were put outside, but Carlos said he didn't think anything about it.
Helen's oldest sister, Megan, would bring this up to police.
They were in the driveway when she came to get blankets for 4th of July, and she said, "Megan, wait, they're in the driveway."
She's saying her mom told her not to go out and meet him. Pamela had bought Helen a house, but was now having second thoughts because Carlos might move in with her daughter. Here's Megan in a police recording taken hours after the shooting.
This morning, my mom let Helen know that she was canceling the contract on the house she's building her because she truly believed that Helen was going to try to move Carlos into the house, and my mom didn't want him being there.
After that, she said Helen was furious her mother had changed her mind, but also said her kid sister was even mad at her. Why? Megan said she and her husband closed on a house of their own in West Virginia. So while Helen's dream was taken away, Megan was still getting hers.
She got mad at me and thought the house was my fault. And then, Mom was like, it has nothing to do with her. You know why, Helen? I can't trust you. And I'm not letting that Carlos move into that house.
Megan said that she was leaving to drive to West Virginia that morning. Before she left, she said the door to her mom's home office was closed.
When I was leaving, like I said, I saw her office door closed, and that usually means she's on the phone, so I just left it be.
She remembered how Helen was out on the front porch, very upset.
I think it was this afternoon when I was leaving the house, and she was crying. And I went out to the porch, and I said, who are you on the phone with? And she was like, Carlos. And I was like, oh, are you okay? And she's like, oh. And I said, is everything okay? Because she was crying.
Police had been given two versions of that deadly morning, one where Helen was scared for her life, and another where she was the likely killer. But which one did the evidence support?
This particular case, there were things about the scene itself that were concerning to us on day one.
Detectives Brian Byerson and Julia Elliott, a forensics expert, looked over the two rooms where Helen and Pamela were shot. Helen was found upstairs in her bathroom. Pamela in the mudroom, found on the floor under a quilt. Oddly, her phone was sitting on top of the quilt in a pool of blood.
We know what that means. We know that it means that phone was placed there sometime after she died.
But this wasn't the only strange clue. Helen's cell phone was set on the bathroom counter near the sink, and yet didn't have a spot of blood on it.
And I want to find out who put that cell phone there in that particular place.
So you want to check for fingerprints and DNA?
Yes.
What do you find on this phone?
Nothing.
Nothing on Helen's phone. She'd find the mother's phone was also clean.
On the front, we will typically see fingerprints, or at least smudges of fingerprints. On this one, we were able to see smears, as if someone had wiped it from side to side.
The bathroom was in disarray, with toiletries scattered on the floor. But Detective Elliott noticed that the rifle was neatly placed. Why hadn't it tumbled away when she shot herself?
The rifle was still laying perfectly within her legs. That to me tells me that if she's moving enough to move things off of the back of the toilet, I would expect that gun to have fallen down to the floor. I also have seen suicides done with long guns where they are not able to retain control of the gun.
But for detectives, the rifle's perfect placement wouldn't be the only red flag.
You have a scene that's relatively small.
Detective Byerson told me that if Helen had killed herself in such a small bathroom, there'd likely be blood on the rifle.
There is blood everywhere. It's all over the place. However, there doesn't seem to be any blood on the rifle itself, which is sitting in the middle of all of this, even though there's blood underneath. So that is a huge problem.
To the detective, this just didn't make sense.
We had a generally clean weapon, and then underneath the weapon, there was blood where there shouldn't have been, if the weapon was there.
So that suggests perhaps someone else shot Helen.
It suggests that the weapon wasn't there until later on.
Which doesn't sound like a murder-suicide to me then, right?
It does not.
And in the basement, another strange sight. Detective Elliott found couch cushions that looked like they'd been slashed with a knife.
I wasn't sure if someone was taking out some anger or what they were doing.
Was it a tear kind of cut or was it a puncture kind of cut?
It was a stabbing puncture type cut.
Like someone had what, practiced on it?
Yes.
And is it true that there was a long knife found in the house?
Yes.
The knife was in plain sight. She took a photo of it still down there in the basement.
This is the knife, and it's sitting on a bookshelf that was just to the left of the couch cushions in the same room.
Detective Elliott believed the killer may have considered using the knife as a murder weapon instead of the rifle. And then, when Detective Elliott turned to look at Pamela Hargan's bookshelves, she spotted something else.
So that center set of books that are kind of gray with the red band, those are photo albums. And I got a little nosy, and I wanted to see what my victims may have looked like in life or as they grew up. So I pulled out one of the center photo albums to look at it and open it up. And behind it was a piece of evidence that ended up being quite important.
What was found?
It was a photocopy of Pamela's spreadsheet that she used for all her accounts, account numbers, and passcodes. It was also a photocopy of Pamela's bank statement.
This was still the night of the shootings, and while Detective Elliott wanted to dig in and learn more about this bank statement,
financial documents were not on our search warrant, and so therefore I could not take it. We photographed it as we found it that night, and eventually a couple days later came back with a search warrant to recover those papers, and they were not there.
They were not there?
They were not.
You found yourself a pretty interesting piece of evidence, right?
Yes. At the time, we weren't exactly sure what we were dealing with.
Detectives were becoming increasingly convinced that both the Hargan women had been murdered. But by who? And what was the motive? It would turn out that Helen's boyfriend, Carlos, had shared a theory with Ashley. Here's Detective John Vickery asking the father, Steve Hargan, about it.
Tell me again what Carlos says to you, to her.
I'll tell you exactly what Ashley tells me that Carlos said to her, that Megan shot your mother.
Earlier that July morning, Carlos had woken up to some messages from his girlfriend, Helen. One text read, "I wanted to see if by chance you were awake. Call me when you do wake up. Love you." To Carlos, nothing out of the ordinary.
Everything appeared to be okay.
Our producer, Michelle Sagona, read through Carlos's court testimony about that morning. He was at home in Dallas and had slept in. The two played phone tag until after 11 Eastern Time. When Carlos finally caught her, Helen was beside herself.
Later in the morning, Carlos says specifically that Helen sounded frightened and scared. He used words like Helen was trembling, she was sobbing, she was very frantic.
She immediately told him why, and Carlos would tell 911.
Fairfax County Police and Fire, how may I assist you?
My girlfriend told me that her sister killed her mom, and now my girlfriend won't answer her phone.
Carlos explained to the operator that Helen told him her sister Megan came upstairs to her room and said that she killed her mother Pamela.
So if you let that sink in for a minute, she told me that her sister had killed her mother. I can't imagine being in Dallas, Texas, while talking to my girlfriend on the phone who was inside this home where something horrific has happened and not really knowing what to do.
Carlos even said Helen told him she could hear her mother gasping for life. Things sounded dire.
He was trying to get to the heart of what was happening in all of this.
Carlos told Helen to leave immediately.
He was trying to tell her to get out of the house, to call police, to do something. But Helen had hesitation. According to Carlos, Helen was very nervous and possibly scared for her niece, who apparently was also in the home.
Helen wanted to protect her niece, Megan's daughter Molly, and that she was worried what her sister might do if the police showed up.
She didn't want her niece to see her mother getting arrested.
Soon after, Helen stopped responding, and he called for help. But Carlos couldn't recall Pamela Hargan's address.
Okay, where do you live?
I live in Dallas. She lives in McLean.
Okay, and what's her address?
I don't know. She's at her mom's house. Her mom's name is Pam Hargan.
Carlos thought his future wife's life was at risk, But this lack of details only left emergency services with more questions. They asked Carlos to call back when he had more information and kept having him speak to different operators, rehashing what Helen had told him. Finally, the public safety supervisor in Fairfax County, Virginia, called Carlos herself. Her name is Lisa Wagoner Smith. She wanted to know how this alleged murder had unfolded.
Okay, was this just out of the blue? Did she say how she did it or why she did it?
She said she shot her. She said she woke up and her sister told her she shot her mom.
So your girlfriend is sitting in a house with a dead woman.
The 911 supervisor sounded skeptical. Why would Helen stay put if her sister had killed their mom? Carlos would call back with the right information and reach a 911 operator.
I reported a murder earlier, and I didn't have the address, and now I have the address.
So what do you mean you reported a murder earlier? Do you think something happened there?
Well, I know for a fact that her sister shot her mom.
When?
This morning. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys, yeah, this morning. She called me and told me that her sister shot her mom, and she didn't know what to do, and I told her to call the cops to get the kid, and to call the cops.
The operator passed Carlos back to Lisa, the supervisor. With the address and some information confirmed, after multiple calls from Carlos, 911 was finally able to send help.
We are sending an officer out there. Is there anything else you can think of that we need to know?
No, I mean, I'm just freaking out. I'm thinking something bad happened to my girlfriend.
In case you didn't catch that, Carlos said he was freaking out and worried something had happened to Helen. Before they end the call, though, Carlos did think of something else officers needed to know.
If y'all need it, I have, some incriminating text that her sister sent me.
Carlos thought Megan was texting him, not his girlfriend.
What does that say?
Because after the fact that Helen told me that her sister killed her mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
I called her and she wouldn't answer, and then so she texted me back, Helen did, and it was like, hey, sorry, I'm just arguing with my mom. She pisses me off. I hate her. And this is after the fact that Helen told me that her sister killed her mom, so I know that her sister got her phone and was sending these messages.
Here's what one of those texts said. Everything is fine. I'm not mad at Megan. I'm mad that my mom paid for her house. She and her husband should buy it themselves. Here is our producer, Michelle Sagona, again.
Based on these text messages he was receiving, they were a huge red flag for Carlos.
He just wanted Helen to call him, but all he got were texts, and that started to feel suspicious. I'm not even mad at her, really, the text continued. Just effing hate my mom. Carlos didn't think that sounded like the woman he loved. He kept calling Helen's cell.
Finally, he was able to reach someone, but it was not Helen. It was Megan on the other side of the phone.
Here's Carlos again.
Yes, and now I called my girlfriend, and her sister answers the phone and refuses to let me talk to my girlfriend.
But Carlos persisted.
And he kept asking, I need to speak with Helen. I'm having a bad day. I need to speak with Helen. And he's just getting some conflicting information.
Carlos doesn't back down. He said he stayed on the phone, pushing Megan to give the phone to Helen for nearly 10 minutes.
He believes at this point that she is not okay.
On that long call, Carlos said Megan told him that her mother didn't approve of him and that she wasn't going to let them move into the new house in Aldi.
Carlos claims that, Pam had never said that to him or to Helen.
The call ended without him ever speaking to his girlfriend.
So none of this is making sense to him. This is why he decides to make a brave move and call 911.
Carlos realized that he needed to be the one to call for help and would begin his agonizing journey to sound the alarm with the emergency services.
My gosh, can you imagine? I mean, not knowing what's happening inside of that house and trying to call 911 and being told you have to go through all these steps.
Megan told police she left the house around 1:30 that afternoon, headed for West Virginia, and then turned around to go to her dad's after she heard about the shooting. Ashley was racing to her dad's too. Carlos had called her while she was in the car, but Ashley had trouble believing his story. Here is Detective Vickery asking Ashley about the call after she arrived at her dad's.
We heard you received a call from Carlos?
Yes, and
Okay.
I don't even know this kid. It was a stranger off the street. He was saying that this sister shot my mom.
By this sister, Ashley meant Megan, who was sitting right there with them.
She would never do that. Ever. Never. Okay? Obviously, I've known her my entire life, and we've been through hell and back together. I know my sister.
Ashley told the detective she's been calling her mom and sister. Megan chimed in to say she has too.
I left voicemails for Mom. I was trying to talk.
Carlos was saying Megan killed her mother, but in that moment, the sisters were dismissive of him.
I don't know this guy from Adam. That's what I've been saying, Meg.
Ashley made it clear she didn't believe that Megan is a murderer.
Do you recall his exact words?
Megan shot your mom. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
We were together all morning.
Meg, I know, nothing's adding up.
Nothing was adding up. Ashley and her dad didn't seem scared of Megan. Police didn't arrest her. And that day, law enforcement told the public that the killer was dead. Patrol officers thought Helen had done it. But given how the crime scene didn't neatly fit a murder-suicide and Carlos's 911 calls, Detective Byerson asked himself the question: was Megan the killer? Did she murder both her mom and Helen that morning?
We have manipulated crime scene in multiple places, the wiped phone, the possibly wiped rifle, the placing of the rifle. We have the fact that mom was covered and that her phone was laying on top of the quilt.
A couple days later, they would hear about a suspicious call.
It becomes very obvious to us that there is no boogeyman here. It is exactly who we think it is.
From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Judy Tygard is the executive producer of 48 Hours. Original reporting by 48 Hours producers Sarah Ely, Michelle Sagona, Lauren White, and Josh Yeager. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio, and Maura Walls is the senior story editor. Recording assistance from Alan Pang and Marlon Policarp. Special thanks to Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus and 48 Hours senior producer Peter Schweitzer. Blood is Thicker is produced by Sony Music Entertainment. It was written and produced by Alex Schumann. Our executive producers are Catherine St. Louis and Jonathan Hirsch. Our associate producer is Zoe Culkin. Theme and original music composed by Hansdale Shee. He also sound designed and mixed the episodes. We also use music by Blue Dot Sessions. Catherine Newhan is our fact checker. Our production managers are Tamika Balance-Kolasny and Samantha Allison. I'm Peter Van Sant. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to rate and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. You can listen to Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.
We had to take every scenario into play. That's our responsibility.
After spending the whole evening combing for clues at the Hargan house, homicide detective Brian Byerson of the Fairfax County Police knew something was off. The rifle leaning against Helen's dead body wasn't covered in blood. Both Helen and Pamela's cell phones had been wiped clean. And then, later into the day, the detective learned what Helen's boyfriend, Carlos Gutierrez, had told 911 dispatchers.
My girlfriend told me that her sister killed her mom, and now my girlfriend won't answer her phone.
Carlos had said that Helen's sister Megan had killed Pamela.
We knew that Megan Hargan was at her father's home. I had a conversation with that detective, and I asked him to get a good statement from her as far as where she was, and GSR her hands.
Gunshot residue.
Gunshot residue, yes.
The police took photos of Megan and gathered evidence that evening. And Fairfax County Police used one of their gunshot residue kits to test Megan's hands. And the result revealed something both suspicious and disturbing.
Megan Hargan had gunshot residue on her hands. There is no reason that she should have that.
By nightfall, the day of the shootings, detectives knew Megan had recently fired a weapon. Remember, both victims had been shot to death. The next day, another crucial piece of evidence came to light.
In these kind of cases, we don't really know anything until other things happen, meaning the autopsy is extremely important in these cases.
Authorities examined Pamela and Helen's bodies.
And at the autopsy, we realized that the gunshot wound on Helen Hargan was in the top of her head.
The entrance and exit wounds didn't make sense to Byerson.
We don't see a way that she could have made that, or she could have shot herself. With the trajectory that we were seeing in the x-rays.
We were face to face when Detective Byerson told me this. He then demonstrated what happened to Helen, according to the autopsy. He lifted up his arm and pointed straight down at the top of his head. That's the angle he said the bullet entered Helen's skull, from the top of her head down into her neck.
It's straight down, left to right.
In crime scene photos, the .22 caliber long rifle is aimed up, resting in her lap.
She would have to hold it straight up and be able to reach the trigger to accomplish this. I've never seen that before, and I've worked a lot of death cases. I've worked a lot of murders. I've never seen that. We had other detectives at the time that had much more experience than I did. We all agreed that this is not even a possibility.
In his mind, they were now investigating a double homicide.
So now this big puzzle, we're starting to fit pieces together, and we're starting to see a general outline of maybe what happened here.
Detective Byerson wanted to talk with the only other adult who said they were in the house the day of the shooting.
Detective, this is Megan Hargan. I'm sorry I didn't have your phone number.
By then, Megan Hargan had talked on the phone with Detective Byerson a few times.
I offered everything the first night. I said, please, just whatever you need.
But Byerson wanted to speak in person.
She had offered to come in one time and give us anything that we asked for, so we took advantage of that.
At this point, they've got evidence, and they want to confront Megan with some of it and see how she reacts. Would she have a good explanation for having touched the rifle? And if she did have something to do with the deaths of her loved ones, would she confess? I'm Peter Van Sant. From 48 Hours, Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings.
I gave you my clothing, I gave you my fingerprint, I gave you everything because of that. Why would I give that if I knew I was guilty?
Episode 3, A Killer in Plain Sight. We wanted to know more about who Megan Hargan was. In early summer of 2022, we turned to Rebecca Wolf. She's one of Megan's closest friends. She told us more about the eldest daughter in the Hargan family.
Megan and I met through a lot of the animal rescue work that we did together. We fostered some of the same dogs.
Rebecca said they met a couple of years before the shootings.
2015, 2016, we met and just hit it off right away.
They originally bonded over their love of animals. Megan volunteered for dog rescues and even helped veterans bring home dogs they had adopted overseas.
So it evolved, obviously, from just that topic to talking about all the things. Talking about her daughter, talking about her family, talking about my family.
Rebecca said Megan often talked about her life and plans, including how she hoped to move into a new house in West Virginia. She described Megan as kind-hearted.
She will give you the shirt off her back. She raised a great daughter. Her daughter is one of the smartest kids I know.
We wanted to know if Megan had told Rebecca about any turmoil in the Hargan family, any worrisome signs.
You could call it the All-American family now because now the All-American family's messed up, right? So the Hargan family, as told to me, was your typical American family where mom and dad got divorced, all the drama that comes with that, with new relationships, new spouses, step-parents.
But Rebecca didn't remember Megan being all that resentful or upset about her childhood.
As told by Megan, a very beautiful family experience with the perfunctory weirdness of families.
Megan did tell Rebecca that at times she was frustrated with kid sister Helen.
Helen was the baby sister. And if you have siblings, you know the baby whatever is a pain, always. But that doesn't mean you don't love them. That doesn't mean you don't go out of your way to help them. Megan did that for Helen a lot.
The gist Rebecca got from her friend was that Megan was the responsible one.
Megan was kind of the mom of the crew. My understanding of Helen is that she was actually more of an introvert, that she was not the party animal. Ashley was more the party animal.
But Rebecca said that from what she knew, Megan, the oldest, always got along more with her middle sister Ashley than with Helen.
I never got the impression that the relationship with Ashley was as maybe contentious as it was with Helen. And the reason I use that word contentious is because, again, baby sisters can be a pain in the butt.
However, Megan said Helen was particularly dependent on the family.
That was sort of her attitude on life. Mom will take care of it. If mom doesn't take care of it, Megan will come down here and take care of it for me, type thing. So, again, she kind of got the benefit of a mom and a secondary mom.
Helen isn't here to tell her side of things, but that's what Rebecca said Megan told her. And apparently, Megan never said a harsh word about her mother to Rebecca.
Megan admired Pam's wisdom, her career, all that she had done through her lifetime. She always spoke very lovingly of her.
Rebecca said her friend described Pamela as a strong matriarch.
Her loves in life were her daughters and her granddaughter. And she and Molly had an exceptional relationship.
And as someone who enjoyed being generous.
It wasn't like, oh, you want something again. It was, I want to do this for you.
Megan told her friend that her mother had insisted on helping pay for her new house.
Megan was in the process of moving to West Virginia. She didn't need the help.
Her husband Frank's salary was enough to get them a loan, but Pamela's help would let them buy a place outright with cash.
I mean, she was going out to get a house with her husband, the two of them, and her mom said, I want to contribute to this house for you. I want to help you buy this house. So her understanding was her mom was going to do something one way or the other.
Megan had been living with her mom for nearly 8 years. Her husband Frank was a soldier who was often deployed overseas. Finally, the couple and their daughter would soon be back under the same roof and starting a new life in West Virginia. That was supposed to happen the day before Pamela and Helen died. Rebecca expected to get a call about their new ranch-style home, and not a tragedy.
Megan called me and left me a voicemail and just said, hey, it's Megan. I just wanted to let you know something horrible has happened, and I don't want you to see it on the news. And Mom and Helen are gone. Call me.
Megan sounded distraught.
I almost felt bad about calling her back because she sounded so upset.
Rebecca started Googling for information.
Police say Helen Hargan shot her mom, Pamela Hargan, before turning the gun on herself.
Nothing led me to, wow, I think Helen's gonna murder her mom and kill herself over a house.
A week or two after the shootings, Rebecca said Megan came to visit her in Virginia. She didn't know then Megan was a person of interest in her sister and mother's murders.
She just seemed very lost. I don't know any other way to put it. And I think it probably took a long time for her to really wrap her arms around, my mom's gone, Helen's gone.
Rebecca sat with her friend, not thinking, even for a second, that Megan could be the killer.
No, never once. And that's the thing. I mean, she and I have had many, many conversations in the years since all this has happened. And I would not have let her in my house if I thought by any stretch of the imagination that what they accused her of was possible. I just wouldn't have. I'm biased. She's my friend. Do I think she did this? And I always came back to, no, I do not. My spidey senses never went off. I do not believe that Megan killed her mom, Pam, or her sister, Helen.
But unlike Rebecca, detectives hadn't ruled out that Megan could be responsible for the double homicide.
What we're trying to find out, which we think it's important to you too, is to find out who killed your sister and mom. That's what the main goal of this whole conversation is.
I did not kill my mom.
Okay, then who did?
Byerson.
Detective, this is Megan Hargan. I'm sorry I didn't have your phone number.
Oh, no problem, Megan. How you holding up?
I am really not okay.
Megan Hargan called Detective Brian Byerson on July 17, 2017. It had been 3 days since her sister and mother, Helen and Pamela Hargan, were found dead.
We're at the funeral home right now. I'm sorry.
That's
It's a mess right now.
I'm so sorry.
Detective Byerson's investigation had just taken a turn, and he had some questions for Megan.
Hey, do you have a second? Do you have a second? Okay.
They talked on the phone a couple of times that day. In the calls, Megan went back and forth between blaming her sister Helen
My sister was not my sister for many months.
and being adamant that the murder-suicide theory was out of the question.
I can't imagine her doing something that violent.
The same day as these calls, Detective Byerson had learned of new evidence. He asked Megan for certain details on the phone, but asked her to come into the police station later that week.
I'll probably have you guys come out here, so we'll make sure that like your schedule will allow it.
It's just, yeah, and can everything be done at once?
Yes.
Byerson and Megan talked enough that day to fill up his recording device. 2 days later, Megan arrived at the police station with her family. Their understanding was that detectives had new information.
She had offered to come in one time and give us anything that we asked for. So we took advantage of that, and myself and my partner, Detective Needles, had her come in for an update, as we termed it.
Detectives brought Megan to a small room for her to be fingerprinted. Byerson said the other family members were taken into another room.
She comes up, she meets with Detective Julia Elliott. We take a DNA sample from her, we take her fingerprints.
Yes.
Okay.
So she's going to take care of the fingerprints, okay?
Yeah.
And the DNA stuff. And then when she's done, Steve and I'll come in here and we'll get you updated, okay?
After they are finished with the tests, Megan sat down with Detective Byerson and Detective Needles.
Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't mean to harp on this, but I'm here. Like, what do you need?
Sure.
Megan could leave whenever she wanted. Byerson told her as much.
If you want to leave, let me know, and we'll walk you back downstairs.
Okay.
Okay? I just want to make sure that you understand that I'm not holding you here.
And then we then start going through this update with her.
And is this a conversation that's on video?
It is. It's about 4.5 hours long. And most of that is because at some point, we just can't get her to leave.
Detective Byerson sat across from her and leaned back a little in the chair.
We didn't have enough at that time to charge her officially, so we wanted to get a statement on the record from her.
The interview went on and on for hours. At times, it got contentious.
She had very inappropriate emotional responses at weird times. She got very angry at us for weird things. We asked her if she'd ever done any drugs.
Anything about drug use? Anything?
Oh my God,
You
no.
don't use drugs? I never have.
No.
All right.
No.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
That was a really strong rating.
At one point in the interview, Megan told the investigators that she had called police to report 2 suspicious men in the neighborhood, one black, the other Asian. This is something Megan had brought up to Byerson before. She said she reported the suspicious men the day before the murders.
You guys know about, I had to call the police, or my mom asked me to call the police because there was those 2 guys.
What did
That
we've
was
heard about
Thursday.
it.
Detective John Vickery, remember he was the cop at the father's house on the day of the tragedy. He'd recorded Megan talking about these 2 men on the day of the shootings.
I had to call the police over those guys, and you just know when someone, like, that's not somebody that's in your neighborhood kind of thing, because we're a very quiet neighborhood.
Megan told Vickery that to be safe, her mom asked her to hide the rifle in the family room.
I don't think she would ever, in a rush try to get it out. It was in a bag.
Detective Byerson checked into Megan's story, but no one besides her had mentioned these men to police.
The only call that's made about these guys in the neighborhood is from Megan Hargan.
Another issue Detective Byerson wanted to nail down was all those houses Pamela Hargan was supposedly buying and selling. He asked about the one Megan was buying with her husband.
What is the situation with that house? You guys are you
Okay.
guys buying? How's that working?
Okay, so she was going to do a wire transfer. She said, it's too late for me to do a cashier's check. Because she just thought, she was like, I can always do a wire transfer. That's what she just thought. She said, why? She had done it before, I think, with another house.
That wire transfer for more than $400,000 would never go through. That money didn't leave Pamela's account. So what was the problem? Megan blamed a series of complications. There was an issue about which bank account the money for the house would come from. She told Detective Byerson that Pamela was going to use the money from a family trust.
Yeah, because at first we thought the trusts were already going to be dissolved. It was supposed to happen May 24th, and it never did. Or I don't know if it's legally a mess. I don't know what happened. I don't know.
Because you don't know much about the trust
my
situation.
mom just told us you're going to be fine. You can have that for your house.
But that didn't turn out to be true. Megan wouldn't get that house. And by the next day, that Friday, Pamela and Helen Hargan would be dead. Here's Detective Needles.
And did she ever wire the money to them?
She admitted, okay, that's what happened Thursday. This is why Thursday is very important for me. Because I realize this is a big amount of money, and I realize because of what happened, you guys are, like, I understand that. I
We're doing what?
Suddenly, Megan's mood shifted.
You're looking at
Looking at you?
Yeah, and I get
Oh, I mean looking at you because you might be responsible. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
By then, Megan understood she was in their sights. 1 hour into the interview, Megan showed no signs of wrapping up her version of events with Detectives Byerson and Needles.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I mean, Friday's difficult, very difficult for you. It's understandable. But obviously, Friday's important.
They're surprised how long Megan stayed with them in that little room at the police station.
It's probably more like 3 hours of actual back and forth, and an hour and a half of just we're trying to figure out she won't leave.
She even tried to convince them that her cooperation was a sign of innocence.
I gave you my clothing. I gave you my fingerprint. I gave you everything because of that. Why would I give that if I knew I was guilty?
As the interview progressed, the detectives' questions became more and more direct. They brought up the 911 calls from Helen's boyfriend, Carlos Gutierrez.
Because there are a lot of phone calls, and there's a lot from Carlos.
Oh,
And
she never told me. She didn't tell me until later that Carlos called her.
No, but he says you answer the phone. And if that call is on the records.
The detectives bore in, saying they didn't believe Megan. She claimed she'd never spoken to Carlos when they knew she had.
I have never talked to him. Never. The closest thing I have ever gotten to him, 4th of July, they were coming to get the blankets. And I was at the bottom of the stairs. My mom was like, no, they're still in the driveway.
But so you've never spoken to him.
But as we told you last episode, Carlos said he spoke to Megan for nearly 10 minutes while he tried to get her to put Helen on the phone. Then the detectives asked her outright about what Carlos told 911, that Helen said she killed their mom. Why would he say something like that?
Well, what would be his motive to implicate you?
You know, why you?
But why would he pick
Well, he
you?
knows I live there. And I think...
All right.
I don't want to say what I think.
We want you to, anything that'll help you. Say
I don't want to say what I think. I don't want to say what I think. I'm
Why
sorry.
not? You think your sister killed your mother?
There's no way I would have heard it.
Megan's response here doesn't line up with what she originally told police. She had said she and her daughter Molly left the house before the shootings. So it's unclear what she meant by, I would have heard it. Here's Megan again.
The only time I was downstairs, I would assume I would still hear something like that. And my mom was with me. Like how? I don't understand. Like I just don't understand how.
Now what?
How that would have happened. I don't understand. I'm sorry. I don't know.
It seemed that Megan was struggling to keep her story straight. She wasn't sure Helen was the killer anymore. The detective started this interview not knowing what they'd get, but some recently discovered evidence had made them curious about how Megan planned to pay for her new house in West Virginia. She said her mom was going to wire the money.
She initiated the wire transfer.
Her story had changed yet again. Megan had told police that something got tripped up when her mother wired the money. The detectives waited before pointing out the holes in Megan's story. If she's going to talk, let her talk.
We were texting. I mean, you guys got my phone. Like, give you my phone. You can see the texts that were back and forth. She was like, okay, listen, I froze the accounts. I'm going to deal with this when I get back down there.
Up until this moment, Megan insisted that her mom called the bank. But you heard Megan say it, right there to the detectives. And they had looked through her phone. The evidence was clear, but detectives had some evidence Megan didn't know existed. The recordings from Capital One. They could listen to who made the request to wire money. And they offered to play Megan some of the tape.
You know, when you call the bank to do a wire transfer, they record the calls, right?
Okay.
So one of the things that's always been bothering me a little bit is that call.
Meanwhile, in the other room, where Megan's family is waiting, police were playing the calls for them too. They recognized the voice. When they arrived at the police station, Megan's family was standing by her. But now...
So they're hearing the calls, and I think what's going on is that they're realizing on that day that, oh my God, there is a good chance that she actually did this.
On the next episode of Blood is Thicker, an incriminating call.
Good morning. Thank you for calling Capital One Bank. My name is Brooks. Would you tell me your name, please?
Pamela Hanson Hargan.
Hello, Ms. Hargan. Thank you for using our automated system for verification. What can I do for you today?
I was just transferred to you. I was told that I could do a wire transfer online.
Wait, is that Pamela? From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Judy Tygard is the executive producer of 48 Hours. Original reporting by 48 Hours producers Sarah Ely, Michelle Sagona, Lauren White, and Josh Yeager. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio, and Maura Walls is the senior story editor. Recording assistance from Alan Pang and Marlon Policarp. Special thanks to Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus and 48 Hours senior producer Peter Schweitzer. Blood is Thicker is produced by Sony Music Entertainment. It was written and produced by Alex Schumann. Our executive producers are Catherine St. Louis and Jonathan Hirsch. Our associate producer is Zoe Culkin. Theme and original music composed by Hansdale Shi. He also sound designed and mixed the episodes. We also use music by Blue Dot Sessions. Catherine Newhan is our fact checker. Our production managers are Tamika Balance-Kolasny and Samantha Allison. I'm Peter Van Sant. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to rate and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. You can listen to Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for calling Capital One Bank. My name is Jeff. May I have your name, please?
Hey, Jeff. My name is Felix. I'm also with Capital One. I've got a customer, Pamela Hargan.
The phone call you're hearing is from July 13th, 2017. The day before, Helen and Pamela Hargan were found dead inside their home in McLean, Virginia. On the call, 2 employees from Capital One Bank are talking about Pamela Hargan. Earlier that day, someone had called the bank asking to transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars from Pamela's account. Felix is with the wire callback authentication team. He's trying to speak with Pamela to confirm that the request had come from her. Here's Felix talking to his colleague.
I've got a customer, Pamela Hargan, who, when I called her back, she did not call in to create a wire request. And she is the only signer on this account.
So whoever requested that wire transfer wasn't Pamela.
And she asked us to transfer her to you guys for fraud because it looks like they tried to send out a $419,000 wire request.
Ouch.
So, yeah, chump change.
Before he brings Pamela into the conversation, Felix warns Jeff that she's suspicious that they're really bank employees.
She was a little bit wary, not trusting that we're actually Capital One who's calling her.
Felix puts Pamela on the line with Jeff, and she is immediately skeptical.
Hello? Yes, hello.
Hi. Who am I speaking to?
Who am I speaking to?
My name is Jeff with Capital One.
Okay, this is Pamela Hanson Hargan.
At this point, Pamela has only been told that someone tried to move money from her account. Jeff is about to tell her how much.
I do have your account in front of me. So I hear that somebody tried to do a wire out of your account for $400,000 and some odd thousand.
What?
Yeah, that's what the other
For how
gentleman
much?
was saying. 400 and some odd thousand, he said.
Pamela is stunned and insists she never agreed to any such transfer.
I did not do that.
Well, no, I know. He called you because of a pending wire, and then you told him that you didn't do any wires. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. You made me nervous for a minute.
Those accounts are not to be touched, period. Can you freeze all my accounts?
Yeah, actually, I've already done that.
Police would later explain that Pamela was on her way to Pennsylvania to meet with her daughter Ashley when she got this call. She asked her other daughter, Megan, who was still home in McLean, Virginia, to go into the bank and figure out what was going on. In the meantime, Jeff from Capital One reassures Pamela.
You don't need to worry. Your funds are safe.
All right. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. You have a great day.
You as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pamela was adamant she wasn't the one who initiated the wire transfer. So who did? After the killings, police went back and listened to the mystery caller.
Thank you for calling Capital One Bank. My name is Brooks. Would you tell me your name, please?
Pamela Hansen Hargan.
Do you recognize that voice? Detectives thought they did.
Do we think we killed your mom? Absolutely. Yes.
Oh my God!
I'm Peter Van Sant. From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Episode 4, The Impersonator. After Pamela and Helen Hargan were found dead on Friday, July 14, 2017, police learned about that call made to Capital One the day before the murders. It was baffling, so they listened to the call a little more closely.
Good morning. Thank you for calling Capital One Bank. My name is Brooks. Would you tell me your name, please?
Pamela Hansen Hargan.
This is the earlier call from that same day. The caller claimed to be Pamela Hargan, but the voice sounded different.
I was just transferred to you. I was told that I could do a wire transfer online.
Not able to do a wire online, but I can try to help you by phone.
The caller said she needed the money for her daughter, who was closing on her new house that day.
What time is the closing?
In 20 minutes.
Okay, it's very unlikely it will be there in 20 minutes.
Brooke with Capital One told the caller that someone would call her back to verify the details, and if everything checked out, the funds would be released an hour or so after that.
Can you also verify, because my phone numbers were inverted, I think, on my account. This is my home phone number, and this is where I'm at. So this is the phone number that needs to be used. I just don't want to miss anything.
Right. Right, and the number that you gave me matched what we have on file.
Police discovered that the caller, clearly not Pamela, answered the multiple-choice security questions accurately.
All right, next question. What color is your 1991 Chevrolet Cavalier? Is it black, chrome, green, yellow, or you've never been associated with this vehicle?
Never been associated with a Cavalier.
All right.
This caller, posing as Pamela, also knew she had other daughters.
I'm going to be doing this again for my other daughter in about 3 weeks.
Not suspecting any fraud, the Capital One employee then asked how much money she wanted transferred.
Okay, let me get the exact amount. It's $419,034.77.
That's the exact payment the real Pamela Hargan would cancel about an hour later. The next day, Capital One received yet another call from that woman, again purporting to be Pamela Hargan. At that time, the bank had no way of knowing that Pamela had been shot.
May I have your first and last name, please?
Pamela Hansen Hargan.
Thank you. I understand you want to complete a wire transfer with us today?
Yes, we attempted to yesterday, and there was a bit of a mix-up, so we would like to do it again now.
Okay.
This is where things unraveled for the impersonator. Remember Felix from earlier in the episode? Well, he happened to get assigned yet again to call Pamela Hargan to verify the wire transfer.
Felix with Capital One calling to speak with Pamela Hansen.
This is she, Hansen Hargan.
Miss
Double
Hansen
last name.
This time, this Pamela didn't seem to recognize Felix's voice or name.
And may I please have your name again?
My name is Felix. We spoke yesterday.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Stuart.
Felix verified some personal information, and the impersonator approved the transfer.
Anything else I can help you with before I let you go?
No, and thank you so much for yesterday. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, of course.
3 days after the shootings, someone else from the bank's fraud division called Detective Brian Byerson. The representative said that they saw the news of Pamela's murder and thought police might want to know about the wire transfers.
And the message basically reads, hey, this is who I am. This is who I'm with, Capital One Fraud. We saw the news regarding the murder or the death of Pamela Hargan.
Capital One sent the police all the recordings of their calls. When detectives listened, they soon identified the phony Pamela. They recognized the voice as the sister who had gun residue on her hands, who talked their ears off in a police interview 5 days after the shootings. This caller also said she needed money for a house in West Virginia. All signs were pointing to Megan Hargan.
So now we have a really, really, really good motive for murder. I think she thought she was going to get the money. We would think that this was a murder-suicide. She would get her house, and she would just be in West Virginia living her life. I don't think she ever thought that we'd figure this out.
But detectives did catch on and planned to let Megan know. They asked her to come into the station for an update. Their plan was to play her the calls and see how she would react.
You know, when you call the bank to do a wire transfer, you know, they record the calls, right?
Okay.
Megan arrived at the police station not knowing that investigators planned an audio ambush, those Capital One recordings. It was July 19th, 5 days since the murders. Megan had been talking with detectives Brian Byerson and Steve Needles for nearly an hour when they brought up those calls.
So, one of the things that's always been bothering me a little bit is that call. I'm going to play the call for you.
Good morning. Thank you for calling Cap One Bank. My name is Florence. Could you tell me your name, please? Pamela Hargan. Hello, Ms. Hargan. Thank you for using our automated system for verification. What can I do for you today?
I was just transferred to you. I was told that I could do a wire transfer online. No.
They kept the audio playing while they peppered her with questions.
Were you with her or anything like that?
Not able to do a wire online, but I can try to.
Thursday morning, yeah.
Detective Byerson said he hoped she could explain something that happens on the call. 6 minutes in, the caller impersonating Pamela asked the Capital One employee to wait while they call someone else. Byerson suspected the caller was reaching out to her husband.
Is it okay if I just give him a call to let him know that I'm not actually doing this over the phone because they were panicking?
So it sounds like
it's going to take forever with me at the bank.
Okay, sure.
Is that all right?
Sure. You just want to put me on hold this phone?
I can keep you on the phone while I do this.
Okay, all right.
I'll just call
Detective Byerson confronted Megan point blank.
Listen, is that your mom? Come on, Megan. It's not mom. It's time to tell the truth. I know that you called your husband. Okay, and I know that because when I looked at your phone dump, right?
Armed with phone records, the detectives told Megan they know she called her husband at the same time the person in the recording makes a phone call. Initially, Megan didn't confess, but then she gave in.
Okay, who is that on the phone?
It is me.
It's you, right?
The detectives didn't back off. They played her the Capital One call you heard at the top of this episode. The one detectives were certain was the real Pamela.
Somebody tried to do a wire out of your account for $400 and some odd thousand.
What?
Suddenly, Megan started apologizing.
I'm sorry.
The detectives kept pushing. They wanted Megan to say why she was sorry.
Just tell us the truth. That's all we want to know.
I have to understand it.
The problem is you can continue to lie, It just digs yourself a deeper hole.
Listen,
I'm fine.
In the police video, you can see Detective Needles move his chair toward Megan, just a foot or two away, as he pressed her for answers.
You're trying to think right now, how am I going to talk my way out of this?
No, you think I...
Okay. Do we think we killed your mom? Absolutely.
Yes, we do.
Oh my God!
Yes, we do.
In his rush to confront Megan, Detective Needles misspoke. They thought she killed Pamela.
She caught you wiring on Friday. It's okay. Absolutely. Convince me that you didn't.
We have you.
Right there, Megan whispered, "I did not kill my mom." But cops had other new evidence to ask Megan about. There was also a bank statement. This was one of the financial documents Detective Julia Elliott spotted the day Helen and Pamela were murdered. Here's what Detective Elliott told us.
It was a photocopy of Pamela's spreadsheet that she used for all her accounts, account numbers, and passcodes. It was also a photocopy of Pamela's bank statement.
Detective Elliott had photographed the documents, but when detectives returned with a warrant to collect them, they were gone. Detectives had learned that Megan sent the West Virginia real estate agent a bank statement with her name on it. But suspiciously, the amount sent matched what was in her mother's bank account, not hers. The detectives presented Megan with their theory. She shot her mother, then her sister Helen.
So all this looks like you killed your mom and sister. So help us.
Helen would have let me go.
Megan's saying no way her sister would have let her walk away if she'd shot their mother.
What you're not saying is no, I did kill her.
No, I said no, I didn't.
That's Detective Needles laughing. He's signaling that he didn't believe her. Finally, the detectives decided to tell her exactly what they think happened and how they think Pamela was already dead by the time Capital One got the second request to make a wire transfer.
I already know that your mom is dead when that phone call is made.
Detective Byerson said he thought Megan shot Pamela before she called the bank on July 14th. Remember, someone had covered Pamela's body with a quilt. They also found her cell phone set on top of a pool of blood, leaning against the quilt.
How does her phone get over to where her body is and set on top of where she's found?
She always carries her.
No, she couldn't have. Listen to me.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, it's fine.
Okay.
I'm telling you, where her phone is found, she didn't drop it there. It's impossible.
Detective Needles leaned in again, directly accusing Megan.
You shot your mom.
No, I did
You
not.
covered her up with a blanket because you couldn't live with the guilt.
Ew, no.
And then you used her phone and you got your money for your settlement, but the bank was already on to you.
And what? Nobody was ever gonna come to the house. We were
You
never
hadn't
gonna
thought
come to
that
the
through
house?
yet. Then why does your sister call
I
Carlos
do not know.
and tell him the truth?
Remember, Helen, the youngest sister, had called her boyfriend.
I do
because
not
he
know.
spends an hour trying to call 911
I do
to
not
make sure
know.
the love of his life is fine.
Meanwhile, unknown to Megan, Ashley and Steve Hargan, Megan's sister and father, were listening to these same bank calls in another room in the police station, along with Megan's husband, Frank.
What you're not realizing is your family's being told all this stuff right now.
No, I know.
Yeah, right. Now they're going to be swimming in quite. They're up there right now.
The interview went on and on. The detectives dug into more details about the wire transfer. They accused Megan of lying.
That's a complete lie. Why in the world would you lie to? If I'm here investigating the murder of your mother and the death of your sister, which is undetermined as to how she died. Okay, you understand what I'm saying? I'm investigating that. During that investigation, to try to figure out what happened to the two people you're supposed to love.
And then Megan seemed to break. She seemed to contemplate her child growing up motherless.
Blame me. Blame me.
Listen.
My family's been through enough. Let Molly grow up without me. It's fine.
You have got to unload this.
Blame me. That's fine. There's nothing. Just blame me.
Megan seemed to be crumbling. But detectives still didn't have what they needed, a full confession. Detectives established they had plenty of circumstantial evidence, but only a few days after the shootings, they needed more that could stand up in court. So the question was, would Megan confess? Megan Hargan had come into the police station around 5 o'clock in the evening.
There's been some issues over the last couple hours talking.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I understand.
It's hard.
And Megan was still there nearly 4.5 hours later. Again and again, she denied making the Capital One calls. And then suddenly, her story changed.
At that point, had she given you approval to act like her and to wire
Yes,
transfer?
she even sent me the Capital One bank to verify that everything had been frozen.
Megan not only admitted to making the calls, she claimed Pamela wanted her to be the one to request the wire transfer, despite the fact her mother was on tape saying she knew nothing of that transfer. Megan was starting to sound defeated.
So during this whole process, many times you said, blame me.
Just blame me.
I know, but why? I would think you'd be more concerned with Molly.
Molly is Megan's daughter.
I am concerned about Molly, but
But if you're locked up forever and ever, amen, what happens to Molly?
she has my husband.
Megan still hadn't admitted she had anything to do with the murders of her mother and sister, so she could walk away from this interview at any time. The door was wide open, though she didn't seem to understand that.
I'm not allowed to go.
Actually, we told you that from the very beginning.
Of course you are.
You're free to leave.
I'm allowed to stand up and walk out.
Absolutely.
Why would I do that when you guys are accusing me of something like this? I don't understand. You're saying you think I did this, but I'm allowed to leave?
Megan thought she was being played.
No, because you told me that you guys had detectives telling my family everything and that you believe I did this.
That's our belief right now. You're a prime suspect. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that we're locking you up and taking you to jail tonight. We're just talking.
What Megan didn't realize was at the time of this interview, the case against her was relatively weak. Later, I asked Detective Byerson about this. After the police interview, he told me the investigation was far from over.
So murder investigations can be extremely complex, and especially in something like this where you have a family member who you believe has killed almost her entire family, her entire immediate family, other than her father and her middle sister. You not only have to be sure, you have to be right. And that decision does not just rest on me. I can't just go to the magistrate and swear out a murder warrant.
So Megan left that day with her family, a free woman. Days go by, no arrest. Weeks turn into months. During this time, Megan and her husband used a VA loan to buy a different home in West Virginia. Megan's friend Rebecca Wolf told us that Megan decided to start a new life out of state. She immediately got involved in her new community.
So Molly is getting settled in her new school, settled in her new Girl Scout troop, finding the new church, getting settled into the church.
Rebecca said that Megan went to work with her at her pet rescue.
I had held a huge fundraiser for one of the rescue missions that we worked with, so she actually helped me set the whole thing up. So we spent several months researching vendors, getting vendors locked on.
Megan, her husband, and Molly were finally all under their own roof, together at last. But Megan was in a kind of limbo, because the investigators still had her in their sights. I asked Byerson, if Megan had killed her mother and sister, then that would mean a brutal killer was free to kill again during all those months.
All I can say to that is we kept an eye on her. We knew where she was.
Prosecutors in Virginia convened a grand jury to look at the evidence and decide whether Megan should be charged. Investigators had to wait for documents. Forensic accountants had to comb through layers of records, which also delayed any possible indictment.
All of those investigative steps took almost a year and 4 months before we had everything back and we got the okay to indict her for those 2 murders.
Megan's borrowed time was coming to an end. Detective Byerson and a team of officers made the 3-hour drive from the D.C. area to Morgantown.
We all went up there. Megan Hargan that morning dropped her daughter off at school, and once she left school grounds, we had a local officer conduct a traffic stop on her, and she was arrested.
Detective Byerson and Megan came face to face again.
What did you see in her eyes?
Nothing. When I look at Megan, I don't see much behind those eyes. It's kind of empty to me. She has no remorse for what she did at all.
Megan was taken to a local police station in West Virginia for another interview before she was brought back to Northern Virginia. That same day, the Fairfax County Police Department updated the public at a news conference for the first time since they called the killings a murder-suicide.
We did arrest 35-year-old Megan Hargan in West Virginia this morning for the murders of her mom, Pamela Hargan, and sister, Helen Hargan, July 14th, 2017 in McLean.
Understandably, reporters had questions.
Could I ask them why you didn't put out another directive to the public that it was a double murder? Because our community had so many questions. They were told it was a murder-suicide, and then, you all knew it was a double murder all along. Do you not think maybe the public should have been informed of that?
Yeah, so we always strive to inform our community. This case in particular, we'll always debrief what we did and why we did it. I will say an investigative strategy is to find the person that's responsible for a double murder is of utmost importance.
The fact that cops had waited so long made Megan's friend Rebecca Wolf skeptical that they had a strong case.
Why'd you wait 18 months to arrest her?
Rebecca learned Megan had been arrested while she was listening to the radio on her way home from yoga.
I never in a million years saw this coming. And I heard that name, and thank God I was turning into my road at that point, because I probably would have wrecked, because I just immediately started bawling.
She thought this had to be a mistake. After the arrest, Rebecca traveled to be at Megan's trial. And the Hargans, they had to face the possibility that Megan might have pinned the murders on her sister Helen.
And why then did Helen have to die?
I think Helen knew what happened. I mean, we'll never understand, I don't think, in any capacity, why it is that Megan went upstairs and told her that she had shot their mother. I have no idea why she did that. I can only assume that at some point after telling her that, she realized that was probably not a great idea.
From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Judy Tygard is the executive producer of 48 Hours. Original reporting by 48 Hours producers Josh Yeager, Sarah Ely Hulse, Michelle Sagona, and Lauren White. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio, and Maura Walls is the senior story editor. Recording assistance from Alan Pang and Marlon Policarp. Special thanks to Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus and 48 Hours senior producer Peter Schweitzer. Blood is Thicker is produced by Sony Music Entertainment. It was written and produced by Alex Schumann. Our executive producers are Catherine St. Louis and Jonathan Hirsch. Our associate producer is Zoe Culkin. Theme and original music composed by Hansdale Shi. He also sound designed and mixed the episodes. We also use music by Blue Dot Sessions. Catherine Newhan is our fact-checker. Our production managers are Tamika Balance-Kolasny and Samantha Allison. I'm Peter Van Sant. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to rate and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. For early and ad-free access to Blood is Thicker, subscribe to 48 Hours Plus on Apple Podcasts or Wondery Plus on the Wondery app. Start your free trial today. Thanks for listening. This episode contains graphic audio and references to self-harm and family violence. Please listen with care.
I think that she is contemplating how to murder her family that night.
And she wants to do that for what purpose?
The sole purpose of greed, money.
When Detective Brian Byerson first walked through the crime scene on Dean Drive in McLean, Virginia, he saw a macabre jigsaw puzzle, and he wasn't yet sure how the bloody pieces fit together. But now, nearly 16 months after the shootings, he was ready to make an arrest. Detective Byerson told me he believed Megan started plotting the murders after her first failed attempt to wire money from her mother's account. And it may have all come down to, as strange as it may seem, her mother's cell phone.
That's how petty this whole thing is. She knows that she has to have her mother's cell phone because she has to answer that phone and she has to regurgitate a security number that they're going to give her on that cell phone. And in order for her to get that phone, she's going to have to kill her mom.
That petty.
That petty.
But what about Helen? What motivated Megan to also shoot her youngest sister? Perhaps it was to eliminate a witness, even if it was her own flesh and blood.
I think Helen knew what happened. I mean, we'll never understand, I don't think, in any capacity, why it is that Megan went upstairs and told her that she had shot their mother. I have no idea why she did that. I can only assume that at some point after telling her that, she realized that was probably not a great idea and realized that the only way out for her was to stage this scene as if Helen had killed Pamela and then took her own life so she could just walk away and she'd get the money, as she thought, and then everybody would just blame Helen.
2 lives, a sister, a mother, a family destroyed to buy a house.
All for a house.
In fact, when Megan finally went on trial in 2022, that's the story prosecutors planned to tell. The eldest of 3 daughters wanted her mother to buy her a house. When she didn't get her way, she chose to kill her mother, then kill and frame her youngest sister.
It's just an immeasurable grief and tragedy all the way around.
Megan's defense team embraced the theory that Helen was most likely the murderer. They said there was a way she could have killed herself with that long rifle, using her foot. In fact, an expert for the prosecution had given Megan's lawyers an opening.
It's possible for a person to use their toe to engage the trigger. That is certainly possible.
And that claim would change the course of the trial. I'm Peter Van Sant. From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Episode 5, Toe on the Trigger.
I've never seen a case like this.
And how would you characterize it?
Particularly deliberate, willful, and cruel.
Tyler Bazilla served as lead prosecutor on Megan Hargan's case.
This is an individual who murdered 2 of her closest family members for money and for no other reason.
Bazilla and his co-counsel plan to tell the jury the story of a calculating killer.
I'm telling them the facts and showing them that we're going to demonstrate over the next several weeks that every shred of evidence shows that Megan Hargan was the one who committed these murders, and she did it for greed. And it's not Helen Hargan. Helen Hargan was an innocent 24-year-old girl having a normal day.
The prosecution laid out how it believes Megan murdered Helen, then showed how it believes Megan tried to frame her sister as the killer.
There was no evidence that Helen had done any of those things, and all the evidence was that Megan did.
Remember, to make police think Helen was suicidal, Megan had said Helen was depressed and under the spell of a bad boyfriend. She had also given officers a motive for murder, that Helen was angry with her mom for canceling a contract on a new house in Aldie, Virginia. But prosecutors asserted that none of it was true. It was all just a smokescreen.
There was no evidence that the house was being canceled. In fact, they had an appointment for 2 days later to go meet with the blinds guy. When you talk to the real estate agent says there's a whole process you have to go through to stop the purchase of a house. They had never once initiated that.
Prosecutors also countered Megan's character attacks on Helen and her boyfriend, Carlos Gutierrez.
There was no evidence of drugs whatsoever. There was no evidence that Carlos was bad to Helen. If anything, he seemed like a very loving guy.
Carlos played a key role at the trial, testifying for the prosecution.
He was very emotional, even before he walked in the courtroom. He was emotional during his entire testimony, especially when he had to talk about Helen. This is not something he has gotten over. I mean, this is stuck with him.
While the court did not release audio, we have reviewed court transcripts, and 48 Hours producers attended some of the trial. Carlos was emphatic that Helen was not suicidal, not when he spoke to her the morning she died, not ever.
She was not a person that was plotting a murder or thinking her life was ready to kill herself.
Carlos said that Helen was scared and that she told him Megan confessed the unthinkable, shooting the woman who gave her life and loving support in cold blood.
He's an eyewitness without his eyes, but through his ears, and he was sort of there through Helen's words.
Whitney Gregory was co-counsel for the prosecution. She said that Carlos was genuinely heartbroken on the stand.
The intangibles of him just crying, staring down Megan, there's no way he was acting. And just that raw emotion showed that there's no way that Helen could have done this.
Carlos's emotional testimony was followed by another compelling witness. After initially defending her sister Megan, Ashley Hargan agreed to testify against her for the prosecution. She was the middle sister by birth and caught in the middle by this tragedy between two sisters she had always loved.
Ashley presents herself very stoically. She's very strong, independent, but she's grieving in a way that none of us have ever experienced. And I think because she comes off so stoically, people may think she's not as upset as she really is.
Adding to the stress of her testimony was the fact that Ashley was pregnant with her first child.
When she testified, she was 8, almost 9 months pregnant, and she kept her composure.
With one exception.
She got very teary-eyed when I showed her an autopsy photo of her mom and sister, but she's grieving like anyone would.
So for Ashley Hargan, one day she's having lunch with mom and her niece and getting Snapchats from her sister, and the next day her entire family is either murdered or suspected of murder. I mean, she lost everything in a day.
At trial, Ashley strongly defended her sister Helen. But as you'll recall, back when she was initially interviewed by Detective Brian Byerson, Ashley suggested Helen might have been the killer. Prosecutors said that Ashley had been in shock and was simply parroting what she had been told by her big sister.
Megan, out of all the family members, is the only one that ever suggests Helen did this because mom was going to pull the house. No one in the rest of the family had ever heard that. They never even suggested it. It's important because...
And Helen always talked to her sister Ashley, and Ashley would have known this.
Ashley would have absolutely known it. Yeah, because Ashley was close with Pam.
Pamela was actually visiting Ashley the day before the murders.
She was around when Capital One called and said, hey, someone tried to take all this money out of your account. Ashley knew that all the stuff Megan's saying's not true.
In cross-examination, the defense attacked Ashley's credibility, accusing her of lying out of self-interest. They claimed Ashley wanted the money from Pamela's estate all to herself. And if Megan took the fall, Ashley would inherit millions.
She has to grieve the loss of her family, grapple with the fact that her sister is a murderer, and then be targeted for somehow wanting all this estate, and that's why she's blaming Megan.
But it turns out Ashley had a very good reason for her change of heart. According to the prosecution, she had listened to the Capital One calls of Megan impersonating their mother.
She knew 100% through the evidence and in her gut that Megan is the killer. So she testified for us, testified factually, and I think it was very powerful for the jury to see that Ashley believed in her heart and through the evidence that Megan did this heinous act.
When Ashley Hargan was on the stand, Megan's defense attorneys played her recordings of what she previously told police, long before she knew the facts of the case.
When was the last time that Helen had ever talked about hurting herself?
With me, it was probably last year, I want to say.
This call between Ashley and Detective Brian Byerson was recorded 5 days after the killings.
Did you know that your mom was financially supporting the buying of the house with Megan?
I knew that she was
not afterwards, but
right. I knew
since all this happened.
Right. I knew that she was going to be helping them with purchasing a house. Yes.
Okay, and
yes.
she'd agreed with all that.
Mm-hmm.
In this conversation, before she heard the Capital One calls, Ashley backed up Megan's story.
You didn't know how much your mom was giving her, but you knew that she was helping her out, right?
For the house.
For the house.
Yes.
However, on the stand, Ashley claimed to not recall these conversations. 48 Hours consultant and criminal defense expert Matt Troiano reviewed her testimony.
So it's my understanding, Peter, that during Ashley's cross-examination, she says 150 times thereabouts that she doesn't remember certain things.
And that's a lot of times to forget what you said.
There's two ways to look at that. Number one is that she doesn't remember, right? Number two is that she doesn't want to say things that are not helpful for the prosecution. That she has an interest, vested interest, financial interest, emotional interest in protecting her mother and her sister Helen, and that she is not going to be cooperative.
The defense tried to use Ashley's memory lapses in their favor. All they needed to do was sow doubt that Megan was the killer.
It's not the job of the jury to answer the question of who did it. The job of the jury is to determine if the state, the prosecution, has proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
And Megan's lawyers zeroed in on other curious, some might say baffling facts. Remember, Helen didn't try to escape the Hargan home, even after her mother had been shot and her sister had confessed to the killing. Helen didn't even call 911. And Carlos testified that she also asked him not to report anything. Here's Matt Troiano again.
She actually says, don't call 911, as I understand it. The question is why? Why would that ever be reasonable? What is the reasonable explanation for Helen to not want to get help?
I asked Detective Byerson that same question.
That is one of the pieces to the puzzle that we'll never have. We don't know why she didn't call 911. We don't know why she didn't leave.
But Prosecutor Whitney Gregory offered a potential answer. Perhaps Helen was trying to protect Molly, Megan's daughter.
I think it could be survival mentality. She believes that Molly's in the other room. If Megan's capable of killing her own mother, who else is she capable of killing in the home? So I think in part it's just she couldn't wrap her head around what happened, and also too just trying to protect herself and other survivors in the household.
But Helen at this point is not a 12-year-old. She's a university graduate, two degrees, a very bright woman, and she tells Carlos, I can hear my mother gurgling downstairs. And she doesn't call 911 to get medical help for her mom? That makes no sense.
She also is in the home with a crazed maniac with a gun, and so I think she's barricading herself in a bathroom. She doesn't know what to do. She panics.
Prosecutors hope to convince jurors how the crime scene clearly indicated Megan killed Helen, that Helen didn't pull the trigger herself. But then the trial took an unexpected turn. A witness for the prosecution conceded there was one possible way Helen could have taken her own life. Matt Troiano said the defense saw an opening.
The critical question is, could it have been done? If it is impossible to do it, that's one thing. If it is implausible, that's a different thing.
In the second week of the trial, the prosecution and defense focused on one critical question. Was it possible that Helen could have first killed her mother and then herself with a long rifle? The fatal bullet had traveled from a wound at the top of her head downward, which seemed physically impossible. The prosecution called Iris Deli Graf to the stand.
I'm a forensic specialist, and I was hired to look into a reconstruction of the events that happened when Helen Hargan died in the bathroom. One of the first things I do is I look to the autopsy. What do we know from the autopsy? That's fact beyond change. In this case, she had an entry wound through the bone at the top of her head and an exit in the lower part of the cranium going down into the right neck.
With that kind of wound, Graf didn't think it was likely that Helen shot herself.
Top of the head is usually a sign that something else is happening.
Someone else is in that room.
Certainly for a downward to the top of the head, yes.
Graf said she tested several scenarios and showed me her digital reconstructions of the crime scene.
This is a forensic animation, a virtual model that is a depiction of the data.
The jury was not allowed to see Graf's reconstructions in court, but they mostly challenged the idea that Helen died by suicide. Since the autopsy revealed the bullet entered the top of her head, Graf tested all the ways Helen could have pointed the rifle and still reached the trigger. In most scenarios, Helen's fingers couldn't reach.
Fully extended, we still need another 5 inches.
So she's 5 inches short of reaching the trigger if the gun was held at this angle. And based on my experience in covering a lot of these cases, I've never seen a suicide with a weapon, a rifle placed on someone's head by themselves like this. Have you?
Not with this particular trajectory.
But there was one scenario where Graf found Helen could have reached the trigger using her toe.
People have done that, used like their toe to engage the trigger.
That has been done?
Yes.
Okay, try to imagine this for a moment. In Graf's digital reconstruction, Helen is sitting on the toilet, leaning forward so that the top of her head is against the gun barrel. In that scenario, Helen could have used her toe to pull the trigger.
Yes, her legs are long enough that her toe could reach the trigger.
But what do you think of this scenario?
Basically, you're standing on your head to try to get to this position, which makes it very difficult to find the trigger. And the other thing is that you're leaning so far forward that your center of gravity is over the floor, not over the toilet seat.
You could fall down.
Exactly.
She conceded this scenario is technically possible, but Graf didn't think Helen killed herself.
Someone else has to engage the trigger.
So this is a homicide, not suicide, in your opinion?
This would be homicide.
Yet Graf's finding that Helen's legs were long enough to reach the trigger raised enough doubt that the defense made it part of their argument.
Only a producer of a movie could come up with this, and even then, I don't think an audience would even buy that, even in Hollywood.
Prosecutor Whitney Gregory was not convinced, and she didn't think anyone else would buy the toe trigger theory.
It's utterly nonsensical for several reasons.
The defense attorneys even discussed how Helen's socks could have prevented her from leaving prints on the trigger. I asked prosecutor Tyler Bazilla about the theory.
I mean, I thought it was ridiculous. I'll tell you this, that in combination with them using the word framed, that Helen framed her sister, to me meant that they didn't have a defense at all. Because if you frame somebody, this isn't the way you do it.
But remember, all the defense needed to do was convince one juror that there was reasonable doubt that Megan Hargan was the murderer. For her part, Megan chose not to take the stand and defend herself. The jury deliberated on Thursday, March 24th, 2022, took off Friday, and returned a verdict that following Monday.
Guilty on all 4 charges, so first degree of Pamela, first degree of Helen, and then the 2 associated firearm in the commission of the felony charges.
And how did Megan react to the verdict?
At least for me as a prosecutor, I don't want to look over at that table. I think it's not very classy. I'm just sort of in the zone trying not to pass out.
Detective Brian Byerson, who had been working this case from the very beginning, was also in the courtroom.
There's some relief there when that verdict is read, but more so, there's a sense of, I think, weight lifted off of everybody. I know that it was very emotional for Ashley Hargan sitting in there listening to that.
The jury recommended 2 life sentences.
A McLean woman could be headed to prison for the rest of her life for killing her mother and her sister.
Jurors found Megan Hargan guilty of the murders and staging the crime scene to look like it was a murder-suicide.
But the saga over whether Megan Hargan killed her mother and sister wasn't over. Not yet. That argument about Helen using her toe on the trigger caused one juror to go rogue. And what she did next would put the verdict and the entire case in jeopardy. That's next time on the finale of Blood is Thicker. From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Judy Tygard is the executive producer of 48 Hours. Original reporting by 48 Hours producers Josh Yeager, Sarah Ely Hulse, Michelle Sagona, and Lauren White. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio, and Maura Walls is the senior story editor. Recording assistance from Alan Pang and Marlon Polycarp. Special thanks to Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus and 48 Hours senior producer Peter Schweitzer. Blood is Thicker is produced by Sony Music Entertainment. It was written and produced by Alex Schumann. Our executive producers are Catherine St. Louis and Jonathan Hirsch. Our associate producer is Zoe Culkin. Theme and original music composed by Hansdale Shi. He also sound designed and mixed the episodes. We also use music by Blue Dot Sessions. Catherine Newhan is our fact checker. Our production managers are Tamika Balance-Kolasny and Samantha Allison. I'm Peter Van Sant. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to rate and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. You can listen to Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Anytime we were sitting and awaiting a verdict from a jury is a little bit nerve-wracking.
Detective Brian Byerson anxiously waited in the hallway at the Fairfax County Courthouse while jurors considered Megan Hargan's fate.
You never really know what a jury's thinking.
During the trial, Detective Byerson says he rarely knows what is happening inside the courtroom. As a witness, he is forbidden from hearing other testimony until it's time for closing arguments.
I can't talk to the other witnesses, so I end up just sitting in the hallway or sitting in a conference room by myself and just kind of wondering for weeks, I hope it's going well.
Byerson says he spends hours studying people's faces as they go in and out of court. He'll notice whether prosecutors walk by in a good mood or if a witness seems upset after they testify. But outside of those glimpses, Byerson doesn't have any other idea how a trial is going, including the case against Megan Hargan.
Juries can be funny.
And of course, Detective Byerson was hoping that when the jurors heard all the evidence laid out, they'd convict Megan.
I've always thought that once you explain this to anybody, they generally at the end go, oh yeah, she absolutely did this. It's clear as day, right? But you don't know what's going on behind those closed doors with the jury.
After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of jury deliberations, Detective Byerson could finally exhale. Megan Hargan was found guilty of first-degree murder for killing her mother and youngest sister.
It's like an emotional rush. I mean, you feel good. I remember feeling like the jury understood what happened here.
A McLean woman could be headed to prison for the rest of her life for killing her mother and her sister.
Jurors found Megan Hargan guilty of the murders and staging the crime scene to look like it was a murder-suicide.
Detective Byerson thought it was all over, except for the sentencing. He was wrong. A wrench, or perhaps a sledgehammer, got thrown into the proceedings. After Megan's conviction, the defense alerted the judge that they had discovered juror misconduct. A woman on the jury allegedly had gone rogue.
One of the jurors had volunteered that they had done an experiment.
Jurors are supposed to stick with what they're told in court, not reenact a crime scene on their own.
So the judge made a decision to vacate the jury verdict and told us that we would have to retry Megan Hargan.
It was anyone's guess whether the second jury would agree with the first. I'm Peter Van Sant. From 48 Hours, this is the finale of Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Episode 6, The Aftermath. Throughout this podcast, one man has known the case best, Detective Brian Byerson.
The detectives in the family are the only ones that have been dealing with it since day one.
Byerson started with the Fairfax County Police Department about 2 decades ago. He's worked homicides for nearly 10 years, and he spent 6 of those years regularly talking to Megan's sister, Ashley Hargan. At times, he said they spoke nearly every week.
There is a very small group of people in the world that have been intimately involved in these murder cases where they are like a direct victim of what happened. And in this case, it's so much worse because the perpetrator of these crimes is also a member of your family.
Victims' families say Byerson brings a calmness to dark situations. He gives his time freely to suffering family members like Ashley. After all, the Hargan murders are just one of many he's assigned with at any given time.
We can only cherish these wins for a short amount of time because we live in tragedy.
Byerson understands he's the person who likely knows the most about what happened to their loved one. He thinks it's part of his job to be there.
We're available to these families 24 hours a day, even to this day.
And so Detective Byerson was there when the judge decided Megan and what was left of the family she helped to destroy would have to relive all that pain a second time. You might not know this, but after a verdict, defense attorneys and prosecutors often reach out to jurors to find out what they could have done better. Detective Byerson does it too.
You always want to know afterwards, hey, what did we do that you guys thought was important? Or do you guys have any questions in general about anything that happened? Sort of trying to gauge them to see how do we do a better job in the next trial.
But after Megan's first trial, when her attorneys polled jurors, one of them volunteered that she had done an experiment.
Outside of the jury room at home, sort of a reenactment to try to figure out if one of the theories presented by the defense was possible.
In fact, that juror had tried to test whether Helen could have used her toe to push the trigger of a long rifle. Here's 48 Hours producer Michelle Sagona.
I have personally not had very many cases over my career where there's been juror misconduct. This isn't something that I have personally seen. It happens, but generally there's some sort of conclusion. Someone is found guilty or not guilty.
Byerson told us how the juror's admission set off a chain of events.
The defense then notified us about this. The judge did exactly what he should have done, and that is just vacate the ruling.
Detective Byerson was at that hearing. He understood why the judge decided to throw out the first verdict against Megan Hargan.
And as difficult as that was to explain to the surviving sister, that we would have to do this whole thing over again.
Byerson remembered sitting in a room at the courthouse with Ashley to talk through what the judge's decision meant.
I mean, we sat down as a group after that hearing, myself and our wonderful victim services representative, who was working alongside me with Ashley for the entirety of this journey, and the prosecutors, and we all had a conversation.
During their meeting, Detective Byerson thought Ashley seemed to take the news okay.
I would say that she took it better than I thought she would. I mean, the mood was not good. That was the expectation going in there, was that, I mean, we were not happy with what happened with that juror. But that being said, I could not argue with the ruling.
And in a way, Byerson realized this decision by the judge would be a blessing in disguise. If the judge hadn't vacated the first verdict, Byerson thought Megan's lawyers surely would have tried to appeal the verdict after they discovered this juror misconduct. But that appeal would have taken a long time, years, to work its way through the courts. At least in this case, Megan could be tried again more quickly.
I think what the judge was doing was basically saying there's a likelihood that this will be overturned based on the conduct of the juror. So instead of just wasting all of that time, I'm just going to say from the bench here that I'm vacating.
At his meeting with Ashley, her father Steve, and the prosecutors, Byerson said they immediately started strategizing about the next trial.
Ashley understood that. As difficult as that was, I think for her, she understood what happened, and she was very, very steadfast in her cooperation and her intention to help us out or be available for whatever we needed to go through this whole thing again.
Prosecutors and Detective Byerson saw an opportunity to hone their arguments for the second trial.
That meant going back through the witness list and trying to figure out, hey, do we want to approach this in the exact same way with the exact same witnesses, with the exact same lineup as we did the first time, or do we want to change some things around, which we ultimately decided to do.
Between trials, Megan stayed locked up.
Megan was never released from custody or anything like that. She was held.
Megan's next trial wouldn't happen until September 2023. Almost a year after her first verdict was thrown out. During this time, Michelle Sagona said she thought about Megan's daughter, Molly.
I think about the little girl in all of this who has lost her grandmother, lost her aunt, essentially lost her mother. I think about the victim's loved ones.
While the prosecution had a plan, Byerson still worried about how a new jury would interpret the evidence.
Even though our conviction rate is very, very good here in Fairfax, you never really know what a jury's thinking.
Summer was nearing its end in 2023 when the second trial against Megan Hargan began. It went a bit quicker because this time they left one key witness out.
We did not call Ashley to testify, which was different than the first trial.
In the first trial, the defense accused Ashley of lying and plotting to put Megan behind bars so that she could inherit their mother's entire estate. They also focused on Ashley's inability to remember some details.
The first time was sort of based around some things that she didn't recall. And they spent a lot of time on sort of roughing her up a little bit because she couldn't recall some things.
Ashley wouldn't have to suffer through another difficult cross-examination if she never took the stand.
It just really wasn't worth it to put her up there and put her through sort of a rigorous cross-examination like that happened the first trial.
Especially when Helen's boyfriend, Carlos Gutierrez, could testify to a lot of the same evidence that Ashley had shared the first time around. Plus, Detective Byerson said he and the prosecutors thought the new plan might surprise the defense.
We just kind of decided, yeah, we're going to keep her subpoenaed or whatever, and then we can use her if we absolutely need to, or we can use her later on as a rebuttal witness.
Byerson admires Ashley for everything she has endured.
She's one of the strongest people I've ever met in my life. She was there every day. She came in, she dealt with testimony, and then just like us, she sat and waited for that verdict.
Byerson said that his testimony didn't really change from the first trial to the second.
The way I look at it is all I'm talking about is basically facts, right? Because I'm not up there. I'm not going to be able to offer my opinion on anything or what I think. None of that stuff matters, right?
Detective Byerson focused on the Capital One calls and the 4.5-hour interview Megan gave him. By then, he'd come to see that long police interview in a different light.
She was demanding an update on where we were with the case, which is, in hindsight is very interesting, right? She really wanted to know, what we were doing.
Megan sometimes had a hard time keeping her story straight. But Detective Byerson now thinks during that long interview, she was really trying to figure out how to get away with murder.
I mean, she's a sociopath. I think she's always thought that she could talk her way out of anything, or she could explain her way out of all of this stuff.
The prosecutors weren't sure whether Megan would testify in her own defense. That's why they kept Ashley's possible testimony in their back pocket.
If something comes out that we specifically need her to rebut, especially if her sister ends up taking the stand or something like that.
But Megan never testified.
So we ultimately didn't call her.
However, Carlos did have to fly to Virginia from Texas to take the stand again. Detective Byerson knew revisiting that awful day when the love of his life died wouldn't be easy.
I've talked to Carlos a lot. Carlos is a good guy. This has affected him tremendously, the loss of Helen and the way it happened, and sort of, because you got to remember, he was basically the last person that she ever talked to. And she not only talked to, but she was telling him what was going on in real time. So he's got that burden on him for the rest of his life, which I think is difficult to handle.
It's a burden he eloquently and emotionally shared with the jurors, making him a crucial witness.
Because he's the one that gets in all of that conversation from that morning and the weird things that were going on that morning, like, Megan answering Helen's phone.
Detective Byerson said Carlos struggled to even get through the second trial.
He flew in from Texas for both trials, And I'm positive he didn't want to, especially after that time goes by and stuff. And now we're asking you, hey, you know, I'm really sorry, but a juror did something, you know, that is making us have to do this whole thing over again. Can you please come back out and bare your soul on the stand again? But he did it.
Ultimately, he said that continuing to discuss the murders was too difficult, and he didn't want to do an interview. But Byerson said one thing was clear.
I think he truly loved Helen.
After the defense chose not to have Megan testify, her fate was, once again, in the hands of a jury.
For me personally, when you're sitting there and you get the call that, hey, there's a verdict, and you come back in the courtroom and you sit down and you're waiting like that 10 minutes for everybody to get back, including the defense and you know, the defendant, and then the jury to sort of come out and read that verdict.
The second jury agreed with the first. Megan Hargan was found guilty again of killing her sister Helen and her mother Pamela.
And then there's kind of like this emotional relief that's taken off your shoulders, because especially like for the detectives and the family who have been dealing with this since day one.
At this point, Detective Byerson knew the Hargan family inside and out.
You develop these bonds with these victims because you talk, you know, weekly.
In their conversations, Byerson said that Ashley talked about her niece, Megan's daughter, Molly. Ashley was worried. At the time of the murders, Molly was 8, and back then, she too had to be interviewed by police.
We had asked that Megan not be involved in bringing Molly to the forensic interview site. The Safe Spot is that's who we use to do those interviews. They specialize in traumatic interviews of children. Megan brought her daughter to that interview, which was not helpful. And she also interrupted the interview on several occasions.
Losing her grandmother Pamela was devastating for Molly. She'd spent nearly every day of her young life living with her grandma. Remember, soon after the shootings, Molly's parents moved her out of state. She lived with them until her mother's arrest.
Now Molly's going back to live with her dad, who she hadn't ever lived with before, and is taken away from the rest of that family that was taking care of her.
The Hargans had already suffered the worst betrayal, a daughter shooting her mother and then putting a bullet into her youngest sister's head. And why? For money. And Molly, Detective Byerson says she was left heartbroken and confused.
In a lot of the phone calls after this happened, it was very evident to us that her daughter had no idea where she was. She certainly didn't know that Mom went to jail.
Megan Hargan was sentenced at the start of 2024.
A Fairfax County woman was hit with 2 consecutive life sentences after she was convicted of killing her mother and her younger sister and then telling police it was a murder-suicide.
Both Ashley and Carlos came to the sentencing. It's strange now to think back to 2017 and the phone call when they first spoke. When Carlos called Ashley to tell her shots had been fired at her mother's house and to reveal what Helen had told him, that Megan had killed her mother. Back then, Ashley wasn't sure what to believe.
Every single emotion right now. Hearing about this, finding out about this from Helen's piece of shit boyfriend.
But now, they both sat united in grief at the Fairfax County Courthouse, waiting to hear how long Megan would spend behind bars.
More than 6 years later, this case finally comes to a close.
48 Hours producer Michelle Sagona can't stop thinking about the Hargans and where they will go from here.
This will obviously go on. This doesn't end. The pain and the anguish, I don't want to speak for them, but I can't imagine ends for the family, especially for this little girl, for Megan's child.
We learn that Steve and Ashley Hargan no longer have contact with Molly. As it turns out, soon after hearing those Capital One calls, Ashley did two things. She cooperated with police on their investigation, and she started seeing if she could get custody of Molly from Megan and her husband. At the first trial, Ashley testified that she didn't feel comfortable with Molly living with Megan in West Virginia.
According to Ashley, in her own words, she wanted to take custody of her because she knew she could give her the home that Molly deserved, essentially. And when she said, quote, I could give her a loving and caring home. And yeah, she's an amazing little girl, end quote.
Ashley had stopped trusting her sister, and perhaps by extension, her husband too.
Ashley was in fear for Molly being in a situation or in a home with Megan and her husband. And that's why, according to court testimony, Ashley went forward and applied for custody. She wanted to protect Molly as best as she could.
But Ashley's attempts to get custody failed. And after Megan's arrest, her husband Frank stopped allowing Molly to call Ashley or her grandpa. They are now estranged. Here's Detective Brian Byerson.
For Ashley, not only does she lose her mom and her sister, but effectively she loses her other sister as well in the process, and she's left completely, by herself. She was an aunt to Megan's daughter and saw her consistently. And after this happened, all of that stuff was cut off.
Steve Hargan asked to get visitation rights as a grandparent, but was denied.
Megan's husband at the time just totally cut off communication between their daughter and that side of the family.
Frank hung up on us when we called him for comment. Frank has been such a mystery in this story. Frank didn't testify in either trial, nor has he kept in touch with detectives. Here's Byerson.
He answered some questions that we had in the beginning of this stuff, and then he sort of just disappeared. It seems like he just didn't want to deal with this.
Byerson said he questioned Frank, but never got all the answers.
I've always thought about it like this. If I'm sitting in a realtor's office and I'm going to buy a home with my wife, and my wife sends me a bank statement that would indicate that we had $500,000 in the bank, I would have several questions about that. He seemed to have none.
Frank was never charged with anything connected to the house or Helen and Pamela's murders. And Detective Byerson said they chose not to investigate his involvement further.
I think anybody looking at this from like a fair point of view would probably have those same questions that we have. Like, did you think you just thought it was a gift and you never talked to like your mother-in-law about this huge gift of a, it doesn't make any sense.
Frank was often away on a military deployment, which is why Megan said they didn't live together. It was easier to live with her mother and have her help raise Molly. But Byerson didn't know what changed in 2017. Why, all of a sudden, did Megan desperately want to live with her husband?
As far as we were able to ascertain, they never lived together. She always sort of lived with her mom, and sort of her mom took care of her, and her mom took care of her granddaughter. She was being a doting grandmother, and she wanted to make sure that Molly, had all these nice things in life, and then at the end of the day, that's also taken away from Molly.
Byerson said Megan has never offered her father or sister more details.
I don't know that she'll ever give them the satisfaction of explaining to them why she did it.
Megan's attorney at the Fairfax County, Virginia's Public Defender's Office did not respond when we contacted them for this podcast. At the time of sentencing, her attorneys claimed they would appeal. Even today, Byerson doesn't think Megan would even admit to her crimes.
I think if you asked her today, she would still say she didn't do it. At this point, 24 people have decided that she did in 2 separate trials. And, we're supposed to believe that it's just a coincidence that the day before and the day of your your family's murder that you're trying to do this crazy wire transfer for $500,000 to buy a house in West Virginia.
Byerson knows that even if Megan were to explain why she shot her mother and sister, it wouldn't do much good.
To me personally, because it's just, I know what they lost and how they lost it. And the fact that they're still, putting one foot in front of the other is a testament to them, for sure.
Ashley never spoke to us for this podcast, but Steve Hargan did go on the record to offer a simple truth.
I will forever be devastated that I lost my daughter, Helen. And it's something that has had a profound impact on the family as a whole, and I will leave it at that.
I agree with him. You don't need a lot of words to sort of explain something that's not explainable to the majority of the people who are going to hear it.
Byerson has long believed a court's decision can bring justice, but not closure. Helen Hargan will never marry Carlos or finish grad school. Pamela will never be surrounded by loving children and grandchildren.
This family violence is sort of the worst of this, because I think when it's a stranger, you can still, in your mind, kind of put out a bunch of scenarios as to why this happened, right? But when this person is a part of your immediate family that does this to another person in your immediate family with no explanation offered by them other than this money, there's no closure for them. That's why I don't like that word. Like, they're never going to be the same.
From 48 Hours, this is Blood is Thicker, the Hargan Family Killings. Judy Tygard is the executive producer of 48 Hours. Original reporting by 48 Hours producers Josh Yeager, Sarah Ely Hulse, Michelle Sagona, and Lauren White. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio, and Maura Walls is the senior story editor. Recording assistance from Alan Pang and Marlon Policarp. Special thanks to Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus and 48 Hours senior producer Peter Schweitzer. Blood is Thicker is produced by Sony Music Entertainment. It was written and produced by Alex Schumann. Our executive producers are Catherine St. Louis and Jonathan Hirsch. Our associate producer is Zoe Culkin. Theme and original music composed by Hansdale Shi. He also sound designed and mixed the episodes. We also use music by Blue Dot Sessions. Catherine Newhan is our fact checker. Our production managers are Tamika Balance-Kolasny and Samantha Allison. I'm Peter Van Sant. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to rate and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. If you liked Blood is Thicker, check out the rest of our 48 Hours podcasts by searching 48 Hours on your favorite podcast app. And subscribe to 48 Hours Plus on Apple Podcasts for ad-free listening. Thanks for listening.
There were 2 bodies that were located inside of this home, and that's really all we knew.
Is there a little adrenaline when you're pulling up?
Always. Your blood starts to get pumping a little bit, and you start to think about how this is going to play out.
What did you see as you entered this home?
Well, it's a very nice home in a great neighborhood.
Fairfax County is located just outside of Washington, D.C. It is an affluent area of Northern Virginia. It was a $1 million home.
As you walk through the kitchen, you encounter a mudroom that connects the kitchen to the garage. In that mudroom, we discover Pamela Hargan.
How was she positioned on the ground?
She was laying face down and she had a blanket laid over her.
Like a quilt. Her cell phone is actually laying on top of the quilt.
And there was a pool of blood coming from the area of her head onto the floor.
What else do you find?
We go upstairs, and then we encounter Helen Hargan inside of the bathroom that's in her bedroom.
She appeared to have been sitting on the toilet when she was shot. She was fully clothed.
She has some kind of trauma to her head. There's a rifle in between her legs. She's got a tremendous amount of blood in her mouth.
Finding two deceased persons with one with a gun on their body might have been a murder-suicide.
Suicide?
Possibly.
What are we looking at here now?
This is the main room of the basement. That set of books are photo albums, and I wanted to see what my victims may have looked like in life.
Pam Hargan was a woman in her 60s, an incredibly successful, business-minded woman. She was generous with her money. This was a woman who built an $8 million estate. She poured her life into her family. Helen, the youngest daughter, had returned home from college.
Helen was the kind of daughter I think that everybody would want. She was lovely.
She had a number of friends. She had a boyfriend.
Helen never struck me as having a dark side. Mothers and daughters butt heads. I mean, did Helen and her mother get along perfectly? I don't think so. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
Maybe Helen had murdered her mother and then shot herself.
So, what's your gut telling you as you take a look at these two bodies?
Wait. You will make mistakes if you make assumptions before you actually do the work.
And so she would have had to have done what to shoot herself in the head that way?
Magic. She would have had to done magic. It just isn't possible.
Friday, July 14th, 2017, about 5 p.m. Fairfax County, Virginia police visit the next of kin to deliver awful news. 63-year-old Pam Hargan and 24-year-old Helen Hargan are dead.
Pamela was shot twice in the mudroom.
Lead Detective Brian Byerson says police are recording and whispering to avoid being overheard when they give Pam's ex-husband Steve more painful details about Helen.
She had a gunshot wound on the Peter's seesaw. I'm really sorry.
There was a thought that went around that it might have been a murder-suicide.
Hargan soon summons his other two daughters, 32-year-old Ashley and 34-year-old Megan.
What's happening? What happened?
They react with equal parts pain and panic.
Oh God, what are we gonna do? Jesus, what are we gonna do? I don't know. Her mom takes care of everything. Yeah. I just don't even understand. We were at the freaking house.
Megan Hargan tells authorities she and her 8-year-old daughter Molly have been living with Pam and Helen while her husband is in the military. She says she'd left the home with Molly at about 1:30 p.m. that day adding that there'd been an argument between her mother and Helen, who had been upset.
Helen has been so angry. Like, just so angry all the time.
And struggling emotionally.
I knew Helen was depressed, but like, to do this, like, I can't wrap my head around this.
Is it true that she once threatened suicide?
I think that is possibly true, yes.
In fact, Ashley would later tell authorities Helen had thoughts about self-harm.
I know my sister was depressed.
Has she ever talked about hurting herself?
Yeah.
But Megan also suggests her mother and sister could have been attacked by offering a potentially important clue, something she reports she'd seen the day before.
2 suspicious males casing the neighborhood, and she later tells us those particular guys are the reason why she ends up bringing this rifle up to the main floor of the house.
It's the .22 Ruger rifle found with Helen's body, and it belongs to Megan's husband. She says her mother had allowed her to store it in the house until the couple moved into their own place in West Virginia.
My husband and I literally just closed on our new home yesterday.
Okay.
My mom bought it for us.
Steve and Pam Hargan divorced when the children were young. Pam took them and moved around before ending up in Potomac, Maryland, next door to Tammy Malios.
Megan was very upset about the divorce.
In the next few years, Tammy got to know Megan and her little sister Helen, and often saw them across the backyard fence.
The girls were out in the yard all the time with the dogs, that sort of thing, so.
Tammy says she always knew there was a sibling rivalry.
Megan did bring that up a lot, saying that Helen was the favorite.
But she remembers that for the most part, the Hargan sisters seemed to get along fine. Pam was proud of them.
She talks highly of her girls whenever I did speak with her.
Pam Hargan poured her life into those kids.
Michelle Sagona works for CBS News. She's been covering this story for nearly 4 years and says the other love of Pam Hargan's life was her job. Pam had spent decades climbing the career ladder to become a vice president of aerospace giant Lockheed Martin.
She had built an $8 million estate, but she didn't keep it for herself. She was constantly giving to those around her, specifically to her children.
Helen seemed to have her mother's ambition, double majoring in math and management science at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. That's where Erin Rockneen met her in 2014.
When I first met her, I was extremely scared of her because she didn't laugh or smile. She's kind of like an onion. You have to peel the layers off, and you really get to know the kind and genuine person underneath there.
Rockneen says they became close friends.
It's been said that Helen may have suffered from depression. Did you ever see any of that?
I did not at all.
Rockneen says her friends spent a lot of time studying, though Helen did have a job at a nearby restaurant.
She was working as a waitress.
There was a 30-something named Carlos Gutierrez working in the restaurant too. They fell for each other in short order.
And they had plans to move in together.
Pam had started building a house for Helen in Northern Virginia. So in the spring of 2017, Helen had moved back home from Dallas.
According to Carlos, he hadn't asked her to be his wife, but he was working towards that.
But Megan tells police Pam hadn't approved of Helen's relationship.
She believed that Helen was going to try to move Carlos into the house, and my mom didn't want him being there.
Still, Helen had been moving ahead, planning for the future.
It was just a matter of figuring out her career path. It takes a little while to figure it out, but she was going to get there.
But Helen Hargan never got there.
Fairfax County Police and Fire, how may I assist you? Yes, I have an emergency.
On the day of the shooting, it was Carlos Gutierrez who had first alerted authorities that something in the Hargan house was dreadfully wrong.
I'm in Dallas, Texas, and my girlfriend lives in McLean.
He says he and Helen had spoken earlier that morning, Now, he can't get in touch with her, and he's worried.
My girlfriend won't answer the phone, and I'm thinking my girlfriend's life is in danger.
Okay, sir, what I need you to do then is contact your local jurisdiction, file a report with them, and tell them that Fairfax County requires a teletype in order to do a welfare check.
I feel really bad for Carlos because he's bounced around all over the place just trying to get somebody to listen to the fact that he thinks his girlfriend's life is in danger.
I think this is like life or death. Like, I think someone might be dead.
Carlos Gutierrez would later testify about why he was so concerned. He would also tell a jury he felt authorities were giving him the runaround that day, even when he called back later with something explosive to add, something Helen had told him.
Exactly what did your girlfriend say to you? Fairfax County Police and Fire, how may I assist you? Yes, I have an emergency.
It's 1:44 p.m. on July 14th, 2017. Carlos Gutierrez, Helen's boyfriend in Texas, is having a hard time with 911 dispatchers in Virginia.
Like, I think someone might be dead.
Right, sir. Contact your local jurisdiction, file the report, have them send
The
it to
call ends without a promise of help. So 15 minutes later, Carlos calls again.
Fairfax County Police and Fire.
And this time, he makes a startling revelation about something he says Helen had told him on the phone that morning.
My girlfriend told me that her sister killed her mom. Now my girlfriend won't answer her phone.
Megan Hargan had murdered her mother, or at least that's what Carlos said Helen had told him.
Okay, was this just out of the blue? Your girlfriend is sitting in a house with a dead woman. Yes.
Why was Carlos, who was more than 1,000 miles away, calling 911? Why didn't Helen call herself? What was going on in that house?
I reported a murder earlier, and I didn't have the address, now I have the address.
When police arrive around 3 p.m., they find Pam is dead. But they discover Helen's body too. Carlos had offered authorities a possible explanation for Pam, but Helen was a mystery. Megan Hargan told police something interesting. Her mother and sister had been arguing that day.
This morning, my mom let Helen know that she was canceling the contract on the house she's building her because she truly believed that Helen was going to try to move Carlos into the house.
And when middle sister Ashley hears that Carlos is accusing Megan of murder, she makes it clear she doesn't believe him.
She would never do that. Ever. Never. Okay?
Megan Hargan's friend, Rebecca Wolf, agrees.
I do not believe that Megan killed her mom, Pam, or her sister, Helen. No piece of me believes that.
Rebecca and Megan met in 2015 when they both were volunteering in a program to find homes for dogs rescued from war zones. Rebecca says that Megan always had a passion for animals.
She is very compassionate, generous heart. She is just a really good person.
And Rebecca says Megan often talked about her family, her generous mother.
Megan admired Pam's wisdom, her career. She always spoke very lovingly of her.
And her sisters, especially the baby of the family, Helen.
Megan talked about Helen struggling with things and feeling depressed, but I never got the impression that it was insurmountable.
Rebecca says that Megan called her on the day of the shooting and sounded like a woman who'd lost everything.
Very distraught, and she did not give me details of what had happened. She just said, "We've lost Mom and Helen."
By 8 p.m., police had told the media what they had told the Hargan family. This looked like a murder-suicide. But Detective Byerson says the more he saw of the crime scene, the less he thought so, and the more he wanted to take a closer look at Megan Hargan. That night, he had officers test her hands for gunshot residue and photograph her.
Did she become a person of interest at that moment?
She's certainly a person of interest because we know that she was in the house.
Police knew the house probably held answers. Crime scene detective Julia Elliott, who had joined Detective Byerson at the scene, spent the evening combing for evidence.
I was shown Pamela's body first.
One thing that caught her attention was Pam Hargan's cell phone.
It's laying on top of the pool of blood and the blanket.
Was it unusual to see the cell phone in this kind of position?
Yes, it certainly wouldn't fall on top of the blanket and on top of the blood once you were already covered up.
And what does it suggest that the cell phone is lying on top of this comforter?
That suggests to me that it was placed there by someone.
Elliott says the Helen Hargan shooting scene was next.
She had a lot of blood on her face.
So much blood that it was impossible to see an entry wound. And there was more on the floor, but there was a lack of blood where investigators expected to see it.
The rifle itself had very little blood on it.
The rifle was leaning against Helen's body. The butt was on the floor between her legs. The barrel was pointed up towards the ceiling.
You would expect that if the rifle had been sitting there, as she bled so heavily, it would also have blood on it.
And was there anything on this gun from Megan?
No.
What about fingerprints on this rifle?
None that were usable.
There was DNA found on the trigger, but it wasn't Megan or Helen's.
Is it true that Helen's DNA was found on the rifle case?
Yes, that is true.
But Byerson says only on the tip of the case. Megan's DNA was on the case handles. It's part of the reason police believe Helen Hargan never touched the gun that day.
As she died, someone else was there to place it on her.
She says Helen's phone was telling as well. There was almost no blood on it. And although Helen had used it that day to talk and text with Carlos, there were no fingerprints either.
What we found was what looked like swipe marks, as if someone had taken their hand and wiped off the front of the screen.
Though it would take time to learn exactly how the Hargan women died, in the basement, Detective Elliott saw an immediate opportunity to learn how they had lived.
And I got a little nosy, and I wanted to see what my victims may have looked like in life. So I pulled out one of the center photo albums to look at it and open it up.
Tucked away in that album of family photos was something that seemed out of place. Documents, Megan's bank statement, Pam's too, and a spreadsheet full of passwords and security verification details to unlock all of Pam Hargan's accounts.
Well, that's interesting. Were you able to analyze the paper?
So at the time of us locating that, financial documents were not on our search warrant.
So Detective Elliott photographed the documents and left them in the house. But when she entered with the proper search warrant days later,
they were not there.
They were not there?
They were not.
The house had been returned to the Hargan family's custody the day after the shooting, and something else had happened that day. The medical examiner delivered her report on Helen Hargan's autopsy, casting doubt on the murder-suicide theory.
It tells us that someone else pulled the trigger.
A police spokesman was calling the Hargan shootings a murder-suicide. But the next day, when Detective Brian Byerson saw Helen's autopsy report, he was certain it was something else.
The gunshot wound on Helen Hargan was in the top of her head.
The rifle bullet had traveled downward into her neck.
She would have to hold it straight up and be able to reach the trigger to accomplish this. I've never seen that before, and I've worked a lot of murders.
Well, what does that tell you when you learn that information?
It tells us that someone else pulled the trigger.
As Detective Byerson arrived to work 2 days later on Monday, July 17th,
Good morning. Thank you for calling Capital One Bank.
There was a clue waiting for him, a clue that Byerson was able to take all the way to the bank.
That Monday morning, I have a message on my desk phone from Capital One.
The bank had some startling news. Bank employees had seen reports of Pam Hargan's death and wanted him to know about some strange activity on her account.
Could you tell me your name, please?
Pamela Hansen Hargan.
Someone claiming to be Pam Hargan had called the bank the day before the shooting with a request.
What can I do for you today?
I was told that I could do a wire transfer.
Whoever it was trying to transfer money, more than $400,000 out of Pam's account to a real estate settlement company in West Virginia.
Oh, you getting ready to buy a house?
For my daughter, yes.
The caller was able to successfully answer Pam's security questions.
All right. You aced the verification. Great job.
Detective Byerson discovered that the transaction hadn't gone through, so the caller had tried again the next day, on the morning of Pam's murder.
Yes, we attempted to yesterday, and there was a bit of a mix-up, so we would like to do it again now.
Okay.
They need it today.
Somebody's trying to perhaps steal Pam's money.
Yes.
And Byerson believed he knew who that somebody was.
Well, that is Megan Hargan pretending to be her mother.
Pretending?
Pretending.
He decided it was time for him to get Megan Hargan on the phone.
Megan, how you holding up?
I am really not okay.
Megan claimed the attempted wire transfers were just an innocent mix-up at the bank. But by now, Byerson was suspicious of everything she said. He began to think Megan Hargan had been trying to confuse police all along.
I realize there's a lot of confusion here.
Megan had stressed Helen's depression and anger issues with investigators.
Helen has been so angry, like just so angry all the time over everything.
But Megan told Byerson her sister would never have killed herself or her mom.
I can't imagine my own baby sister doing that at all.
She repeated her story about two strange men in the neighborhood.
I had to call the police about these two guys. Other people had called them, apparently.
But Byerson says that tip went nowhere.
The only call that's made about these guys in the neighborhood is from Megan Hargan.
He had run down every lead, every alternative theory. There were no other suspects. But there was a motive, the money, and the person who had needed it couldn't stop talking.
She demanded to come in and get an update on the case.
So on July 19th, 5 days after Pam and Helen's deaths, Detective Byerson brought Megan in.
My mom was
He says that once Megan started,
it's just unimaginable.
she wouldn't stop.
Everything. I could ask her for anything.
We just can't get her to leave.
This is you.
She stayed for more than 4 hours.
Long story short, the point I'm making.
We would ask her questions that we knew the answer to, and then she would either pivot to something else
I don't understand what.
or just outright not answer the question.
I don't know what you want me to say.
We want you to tell the truth. I just want you to answer the question.
At first, Megan insisted it was her mom who had made those calls to the bank.
I'm going to play the call.
But when Byerson played the tapes for her,
Who is that on the phone?
It is me.
It's you, right?
Detective Byerson says she finally admitted to lying to him about the wire transfer.
Why in the world would you do that?
Because I knew how it would look.
No. It's not how it would look. You knew that if we knew about this, that would shine a whole new light on you.
Still, she was adamant that she hadn't shot anyone. So it was truly bizarre when halfway into the interview,
Just blame me.
Just answer the question.
Just blame me. Just blame me. Just blame me. My family's not concerned enough. Just blame me so we can move on from this, okay?
It seemed like she was acknowledging that we knew that she did it without openly giving us a detailed confession.
This is not happening.
though inadmissible in court,
No, I know.
she readily agreed to take a polygraph.
She failed 3 times.
Byerson says it was all adding up. He was sitting across from a killer.
It becomes very obvious to us it is exactly who we think it is, and it's Megan Hargan.
But despite everything, police let Megan leave that day.
So murder investigations can be extremely complex. You not only have to be sure, you have to be right. And that decision is it does not just rest on me. I have to be on the same page as the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. So in consultation with them, we decided to wait.
Law enforcement may not have moved, but Megan Hargan did. Though she never got Pam's money, she and her husband used a VA loan to buy a different house in West Virginia.
We kept an eye on her. We knew where she was.
Byerson methodically kept building his case. Evidence kept trickling in, including the results of Megan's gunshot residue test, which showed she had it on both hands. And on November 9th, 2018, almost a year and a half after the deaths of Pam and Helen Hargan,
this morning, at approximately 7:40 a.m., detectives from our Major Crimes Bureau stopped and arrested Megan Hargan near her home in West Virginia.
As Detective Byerson takes Megan in, investigators search her home and find yet another important clue, that missing password sheet to Pam Hargan's accounts.
Do you have any doubt that Megan was the person who pulled that trigger?
I have no doubt at all.
What the defense would say is that there is doubt all over this case.
Megan Hargan's defense will include a specific theory of how Helen could have killed herself.
She puts her head down and that she's able to utilize the trigger, probably with her toe, to be able to discharge the weapon.
But will the jury agree?
Even the experts said it's possible.
What did you see in her eyes?
Nothing. I don't see much behind those eyes.
More than 3 years after her arrest for the murders of her mother and sister, Megan Hargan is going on trial.
I think she's pure evil.
Whitney Gregory and Tyler Bazilla are prosecuting the case.
Megan is a pathological liar. That's what she is.
The Commonwealth of Virginia opens by arguing Megan tried to steal more than $400,000 from Pam for this new house and got so desperate for the cash that she killed her. Then she killed Helen to keep her quiet and staged the scene as a murder-suicide.
This is an individual who murdered 2 of her closest family members for money.
The defense argues Helen was the killer, mentally unstable and furious at her mother, who had offered her a new house, but the morning of the shooting announced there was one devastating condition. Helen had to break up with the man she had hoped to marry, Carlos Gutierrez.
What is your greatest challenge with this jury?
Proving it wasn't a suicide.
To do that, they begin by calling Carlos and Helen's sister, Ashley, who testify on the day she died, Helen seemed normal and fine.
Did Helen have a diagnosis of depression?
No.
And she didn't take her own life, says Detective Julia Elliott.
It's a homicide.
Who tells the jury about the bloodstains and position of the rifle.
She did not have an arm span long enough to pull the trigger.
Her fingers are not reaching the trigger.
Crime scene reconstructionist Iris Graff agrees.
What's on the screen?
Okay. This is a forensic animation, a virtual model.
Prosecutors hired Graff to use photos and measurements from the house to create this digital model.
She can't reach that trigger.
Right. We still need another 5 inches.
So based on your scientific analysis, was the wound that killed Helen self-inflicted?
Within the context of this scene, it's not possible that she could self-inflict that wound.
Gregory says that's just common sense.
Did the tooth fairy put the gun hole here?
Helen's wound isn't the only evidence pointing at Megan. Megan's conduct in her police interview is damning too.
Yes, she did.
And so are those phone calls to the bank.
Thank you for calling Capital One Bank. Would you tell me your name, please?
Pamela Hanson Hargan.
I understand you want to complete a wire transfer with us today?
Yes,
That
because
wire-
they need it today.
Megan's panicking because she still owes that money on the house.
Prosecutors reveal Megan lied to police about Pam buying her a house, saying the reality is that Megan was trying to buy that West Virginia property with her mother's money. Turns out Megan still owed more than $400,000 due the day of the shooting. The prosecution contends she'd secretly substituted her name onto Pam's bank statement as proof of funds. Pam was apparently totally in the dark until the day before the shooting, when the bank called the real Pam.
Hi, who am I speaking to?
Who am I speaking to?
My name is Jeff with Capital One.
Okay, this is Pamela Hanson Hargan.
A bank officer had called her to authenticate the attempted wire transfer.
Somebody tried to do a wire out of your account for $400 and some odd thousand.
What? I did not do that.
The defense would say that there is doubt all over this case.
The defense declined to be interviewed, so we asked Matt Troiano, an attorney with decades in court. He didn't try this case, but we hired him to review the file. To help prove reasonable doubt, he says the defense contends Helen was the suspicious one that day.
Helen doesn't call 911. She doesn't run out of the house for safety. She tells her boyfriend, do not call for help.
Why didn't Helen call 911?
That is one of the pieces to the puzzle that we'll never have. That's a question that came up during the trial. Why didn't she just leave? Why didn't she call 911? We don't know.
There's a lot authorities may never know for sure about the roughly 2 hours they say lapsed between Pam's and Helen's deaths. If Megan killed Pam, why did she wait so long to kill Helen? And why on earth hadn't Helen made a run for it? Testimony suggests she was worried about 8-year-old Molly, who was home at the time. Not a good enough explanation, says Troiano.
For hours, Peter, she allowed what is claimed to be a murderer run loose in a home with a rifle without seeking help, without barricading her in to a room.
He says Helen's body showed no definitive signs of a life and death struggle.
Why wouldn't she have fought back?
And how credible are the witnesses against Megan Hargan? Troiano says the defense wants the jury to believe one may not be credible at all, her sister, Ashley.
Her story has changed.
When she'd spoken to investigators soon after the shooting, Ashley told them Helen had once been in emotional turmoil.
I know my sister was depressed.
Has she ever talked about hurting herself?
Yeah.
But once on the stand, Ashley testified she doesn't remember ever saying that.
She says 150 times thereabouts that she doesn't remember certain things. There's two ways to look at that. Number one is that she doesn't remember, right? Number two is that she doesn't want to say things that are not helpful for the prosecution.
Ashley testified that she couldn't recall more than 150 times. Why was that?
Anytime you're dealing with a victim of trauma, there are always going to be aspects that she can't recall.
Whatever the jury thinks of Ashley, the defense wants to explain to them how Helen could have pulled the trigger on that rifle. And they have a theory: with her toe.
She puts her head down and that she's able to utilize the trigger, probably with her toe, to be able to discharge the weapon.
Her toe?
She's got to figure out some way. And the critical question is, could it have been done?
Even the prosecution's expert witness concedes, while very unlikely, it is possible.
Can her toe reach the trigger?
Yes, her legs are long enough that her toe could reach the trigger.
Either way, the judge thinks Iris Graf's digital reconstruction isn't necessary, so he prevents the jury from seeing it. And though Megan Hargan never testifies,
Every shred of evidence shows that Megan Hargan was the one who committed these murders.
in closings, prosecutor Bazilla argues there's no evidence Pam Hargan was actually going to cancel the contract on Helen's new house. And he urges the jury to compare Helen's behavior around the time of the shooting to Megan's. He says Megan's actions speak for themselves.
She's doing all these things that a murderer would do.
But the defense insists there's reasonable doubt in this case. They argue the prosecutor's forensics are inconclusive. And the toe on the trigger theory cannot be ruled out.
It's possible. And if it's possible, that then lends itself to doubt.
Megan Hargan is innocent.
Megan's friend, Rebecca Wolf, spent about 5 years working for the Justice Department. She knows her way around a criminal trial and has been at this one almost every day.
I would not be comfortable sending someone to prison for the rest of their life without knowing, beyond a shadow of a doubt in my mind, that they did it.
On March 24th, 2022, almost 5 years after the shootings, the jury gets the case. Based on your review of this case, as the jury is heading into deliberation, could this go either way?
Sure.
As the jurors come back into the room, they have a decision. Are you looking at their faces?
Yes.
After a 3-week trial, it takes the jury less than 2 days of deliberations to reach a verdict.
I thought my legs were going to go weak because we were standing up and it had been just like months of our lives that this is all we had done.
Megan Hargan is guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing her sister Helen and mother Pam.
How did Megan react to the verdict?
At least for me as a prosecutor, I don't want to look over at that table. I think it's not very classy. I'm just sort of in the zone trying not to pass out.
I think weight lifted off of everybody.
It was a very emotional moment.
The jury recommends a sentence to the judge of life in prison on each murder count.
I thought for sure that I would be getting a phone call and coming to pick her up. 100%.
Megan's friend, Rebecca Wolf, thinks this jury was short-sighted.
I thought they were gonna see through all of this. They were gonna look at all the evidence. They were gonna ask the right questions. They were gonna do their job.
This job is difficult.
Detective Byerson thinks there are parts of authorities' conduct in this case that he would have changed if he could. How 911 dispatchers responded to Carlos Gutierrez, and how quickly the Fairfax County PD went public with the murder-suicide theory.
I don't find it helpful to kind of make a blanket statement about what we think it is, because it doesn't matter what we think it is. It only matters what it turns out to be.
Was justice served in this case?
Depends on what justice is, right? You're never bringing back the 2 lives that were lost.
The domino effect of tragedy from what happened is immeasurable.
Though the trial is finally finished, waves of grief still wash over the surviving Hargan family.
It's just an immeasurable grief.
And ripples still reverberate in the lives of people they touched, like Pam's former neighbor, Tammy.
And I was just devastated. I mean, I didn't have any words. It was just unbelievable.
And Helen's friend, Erin.
I was in shock.
Who had moved abroad after graduation and had to hear about her death from us.
I had no idea that happened to her.
You're convinced if Helen were alive today, she'd be on the road to some great success, some great career?
Absolutely. She'd be a trailblazer.
How do you want your friend Helen to be remembered?
For being kind and compassionate, driven, and caring, just a very caring person.
48 hours. To miss it would be a crime.
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?